This evening, we embark together on a journey designed to guide you into a state of deep, restorative rest and to cultivate the seeds of profound peace within your consciousness. Please understand there is absolutely nothing you need to strive for or accomplish here. These teachings are not techniques to be mastered or lessons to be memorized. Rather, they are timeless, ancient truths intended to gently guide your awareness back to the wellspring of peace that resides eternally within your own being. As we settle in, if you feel comfortable, please let us know the time and location from which you are listening. The profound wisdom of Zen philosophy reveals that authentic peace is not an external condition we must labor to create. Instead, it is an innate state we must simply uncover. Much like a pristine mountain lake whose clarity is instantly disturbed and muddied when aggressively stirred, our minds similarly become clouded and agitated when we engage in struggle and constant grasping. As we move through these timeless narratives together, you may naturally observe your breath slowing and deepening, and your body yielding into a state of spontaneous relaxation. There is no need to exert any effort or force this response. It is the organic, effortless release of a mind that is finally coming to understand and rest in its own fundamental nature. For this moment, release all obligation. There is nowhere else you need to be, and nothing else requires your attention. Simply share the rhythm of your breath with me as we begin this gentle path leading deeply into rest. In a remote, isolated mountain monastery, there resided a revered master named Kassen, who was renowned across the entire region for possessing a truly unparalleled collection of ancient wisdom texts. For more than 4 decades, he had devoted his life to meticulously gathering the rarest Buddhist scriptures, profound philosophical treatises, and exquisite poetry from every corner of the land. Scholars would undertake journeys lasting weeks just for the privilege of studying within his library, which contained treasures found nowhere else in the world. The library was itself a masterpiece of construction. Wooden shelves, exquisitely carved by master craftsmen, soared from floor to ceiling. Every precious scroll was carefully wrapped in protective silk and preserved with the utmost diligence. The air in the room was rich with the scent of cedar and aged paper, and the soft morning light, filtering through the paper windows, cast a golden, tranquil glow over centuries of accumulated wisdom. Kassen typically reserved his earliest hours each day for this sacred sanctuary, reading by candlelight long before the other monks began to stir. Then, one fateful autumn night, while the entire community was asleep, a catastrophic fire tore through the monastery grounds. Fanned by powerful mountain winds, the flames consumed the structure with terrifying speed. Although the monks were able to evacuate safely, there was absolutely no opportunity to rescue any possessions. They gathered helplessly in the courtyard, witnessing the heartbreaking consumption of their home. The library, in particular, burned with fierce intensity. In mere minutes, for decades of tireless, careful collecting, all those ancient texts, irreplaceable manuscripts, and precious silk-wrapped scrolls were reduced to nothing but ash. 40 years of devotion vanished in the span of a single terrible night. When the pale dawn finally broke over the still smoldering ruins, the assembled monks approached their teacher, fully expecting to find him utterly devastated by the immensity of the disaster. Yet, they found Kassen seated peacefully upon a stone, observing the plumes of smoke rising from the exact spot where his cherished library had recently stood. Remarkably, his expression showed no discernible trace of anger, profound grief, or even regret. One young monk, unable to process this paradoxical calm, approached the master with tears streaming down his face. "Master," the student choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "How is it possible for you to remain so peaceful? All those priceless teachings, all the devotion of those years, everything is utterly destroyed. Does this immense loss not weigh heavily upon your heart?" Kassen regarded his distraught student with eyes brimming with gentle compassion. "My dear friend," he responded softly, "those volumes contained profound and wonderful words describing the truth, but remember, they were never the truth itself. The essential Dharma was never meant to be confined to paper or stored on wooden shelves. It resides here," he said, gently touching his own chest. "And here," he continued, gesturing toward his student's heart, "fire, my son, cannot consume what is truly precious." The young monk, however, persisted in his grief. "But Master, consider all the immeasurable wisdom that is now lost forever. Future generations will be unable to access those sacred texts." Kassen offered a tranquil smile. "This fire, my child, has delivered an invaluable teaching to us all. It has illuminated the profound difference between the finger pointing at the moon and the moon itself. For too long, perhaps, we dedicated ourselves to polishing and protecting the finger, the vessel, to the point where we sometimes neglected to gaze upon the luminous object it was guiding us toward." He rose slowly and placed a reassuring hand on the young monk's shoulder. "Yesterday, I defined myself as the keeper of ancient books. Today I am simply a teacher. Yesterday, my energy was consumed worrying about the preservation of old wisdom. Today I am entirely free to embody that wisdom directly. The fire has not truly taken anything away from us. It has simply revealed the profound truth that was always present." In the subsequent days, as the monastic community commenced the challenging task of rebuilding, something truly remarkable unfolded. Released from the immense distraction and responsibility of managing and protecting his vast collection, Kassen's teaching became exponentially more direct, spontaneous, and powerful. Students who arrived expecting to immerse themselves in ancient literature instead encountered a living, breathing embodiment of the wisdom those very texts had sought to articulate. The master realized that his deeply held attachment to preserving the Dharma in its physical form had, in subtle ways, inadvertently restrained him from fully expressing its spirit. The fire had liberated him from the role of a mere curator of truth, allowing him to authentically become the truth itself. This poignant narrative profoundly illuminates the true nature of acceptance within Zen practice. Genuine acceptance is not predicated on liking or approving of the events that befall us. Kassen neither celebrated the devastating fire nor did he attempt to fabricate happiness over the obliteration of his library. Instead, he simply accepted the unchangeable reality of what had occurred and, in doing so, opened his entire being to whatever deeper wisdom the experience held. Zen practice teaches us unequivocally that our resistance to what has already passed, the insistence that reality should have been otherwise, is the root cause of our most profound suffering. We expend immense and precious energy waging futile battles against realities that are already won or irrevocably lost. When we finally cease this exhausting struggle against the inevitable flow of existence, we unlock an intrinsic, inner freedom that remains wholly untouched by any external circumstance. In this narrative, the fire serves as a potent metaphor for all the abrupt, unforeseen losses and radical changes that life inevitably delivers. Sometimes, these events burn away our carefully constructed plans, dissolve our familiar sense of identity, or strip us of our most treasured possessions. Our immediate, conditioned instinct is to label these occurrences as tragedies, as active enemies of our happiness. But Zen compels us to look much deeper. What if every significant loss simultaneously functions as a powerful liberation? What if the things that burn away were, in fact, the very things that were binding us? Kassen realized that his dedication or attachment to the preservation of wisdom had unwittingly become an obstruction to its embodiment. The fire set him free from merely being the custodian of truth, allowing him to fully inhabit truth itself. This transformative teaching extends its relevance into every sphere of our personal lives. When we are forced to relinquish a job we believed defined our worth, we often unearth latent talents we never knew we possessed. When a relationship reaches its conclusion, we may discover a profound capacity for restorative solitude and self-reliance that strengthens our core being. When physical ability is limited by illness, we are sometimes driven to develop inner resources, patience, clarity, depth, that are ultimately far more valuable than the lost physical capacity. The foundation of acceptance lies in one simple, unassailable recognition: what has already come to pass has already come to pass. Our futile resistance holds no power to alter the past. However, our conscious acceptance possesses the power to profoundly transform our future. When we finally cease fighting the reality of what is, we become fully available to embrace what might be. Take one more slow, gentle breath. Now, observe the physical sensation of your body relaxing naturally when you cease bracing yourself against non-existent or imaginary threats. This is the embodied sensation of acceptance, not a feeling of collapse or defeat, but a profound, wise yielding that wisely conserves your vital energy for pursuits that genuinely matter. Let us now shift our attention to a different narrative, one that reveals how the power of acceptance can fundamentally transform even our relationship with imperfection itself. There once was a young student named Daiki who sought instruction at a mountain monastery renowned far and wide for its exquisitely maintained gardens. Daiki possessed an intense, lifelong affinity for classical beauty and perfection, and he sincerely hoped that by learning to tend these celebrated grounds, he might accelerate his path toward enlightenment. He pictured spending his days amidst meticulously arranged flowers, strolling geometrically precise pathways, and caring for trees pruned into flawlessly ideal forms. On his very first morning, the head gardener, an aged monk named Sosin, led Daiki on a comprehensive tour of the grounds. They passed through sections of breathtaking beauty where every element seemed to coexist in flawless harmony. Elegant cherry trees formed graceful arches over winding stone paths. Moss-covered rocks were arranged in seemingly intentional, naturalistic patterns, and small streams flowed with a gentle musical resonance over carefully positioned river stones. However, as their walk continued, they arrived at a section that appeared utterly forgotten or perhaps willfully neglected. Here, the plants grew in wild, seemingly chaotic profusion. Stubborn weeds forced their way between the paving stones, and tree branches jutted out at unconventional angles. At the very heart of this untended area stood an ancient pine tree, dramatically twisted and bent by decades of unrelenting mountain storms. Its formidable trunk curved in 3 distinct directions, its branches stretched out at bizarre angles, and its bark was deeply scarred and weathered. Daiki regarded the tree with clear displeasure. "Master Sosin," he inquired, "surely this unsightly old tree blemishes the overall beauty of your immaculate garden. Why not have it removed and replace it with something more aesthetically pleasing? Something that grows straight and strong, like the other magnificent pines?" Sosin paused and fixed his gaze upon the twisted tree with undeniable affection. "This tree," he stated quietly, "is perhaps my most valuable teacher. It has revealed a profound truth that all the perfect, flawless specimens in the formal gardens could never possibly disclose." Daiki looked utterly confused. What fundamental lesson could this damaged specimen possibly offer that a healthy tree cannot? The old gardener approached the twisted pine and placed his worn, weathered hand gently upon its gnarled bark. "This tree has endured for more than 200 years, he explained. "It has weathered catastrophic storms that utterly destroyed younger, straighter trees. It learned to bend without ever breaking, adapting tirelessly without compromising its fundamental, essential nature. Every single curve etched into its trunk narrates a unique story of resilience. Every twisted branch is a testament to a creative response forged in difficulty. He looked at his young student with eyes full of gentle warmth. The straight trees thriving in the formal garden are indeed beautiful, yes, but their beauty is entirely conditional, dependent on perfect circumstances. They require protection from fierce winds, the best soil, and constant pruning to maintain their desired shape. This old pine, however, discovered its own unique path to beauty despite imperfect conditions. Perhaps it is beautiful because of them. Sosin led Daiki to a nearby stone bench facing the old tree and invited him to be seated. For the next 7 days, he instructed, I want you to dedicate 1 hour each morning to simply sitting here with this tree. Do not attempt to fix it or improve it. Do not judge its flaws or wish it were different. Simply be fully present with it, exactly as it is. Daiki felt a surge of disappointment. He had traveled here to learn the art of creating beauty, not to contemplate what he judged to be an eyesore. Nonetheless, trusting his master, he reluctantly agreed to the practice. The first morning proved challenging. Daiki sat grudgingly, his mind churning with criticism. To him, the tree represented failure, a stark symbol of everything that results when maintenance is neglected. He spent nearly the entire hour mentally drafting plans for improving the garden once this offensive specimen was finally removed. Yet, as the week progressed, a subtle but profound shift began to occur in his perception. On the third morning, he observed how the rising sun caught the deep, rugged grooves in the bark, creating patterns of shadow and light that were strikingly beautiful in an unexpected way. On the fourth day, he noticed a small, resourceful bird had constructed its nest safely tucked into one of the tree's twisted branches, utilizing the unusual angles for optimal protection and structural support. By the conclusion of the week, Daiki was genuinely looking forward to his solitary time with the tree. He began to perceive its distorted form not as a failure to grow correctly, but rather as a living masterpiece of adaptation. Every bend and sweeping curve was the tree's unique, creative response to the specific, harsh challenges it had encountered. No perfectly straight tree could ever relate such a rich history of survival and resilience. On the final morning, as Daiki settled into his customary place, Sosin joined him. And what profound lesson has the tree revealed to you? The old master inquired. Daiki remained silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts before responding. It has taught me that there are vastly different forms of beauty. The formal gardens possess a beauty akin to a perfect lyrical poem, but this tree is beautiful in the way a wise, weathered face is beautiful. A face that openly bears the marks of its history. I arrived here with the intention of learning how to force things into perfection, but the tree has instead shown me how to recognize and find perfection inherent in things exactly as they are. Sosin nodded in silent agreement. The tree grows entirely according to its intrinsic nature and the circumstances it faces. It expends no energy trying to become a different kind of tree. It simply responds to every single moment with absolute authenticity. This, Daiki, is the most profound teaching of Zen. Not to violently force ourselves or our world into rigid, predetermined shapes, but to discover the natural, inherent perfection that effortlessly emerges when we finally stop struggling against reality. This narrative unlocks another essential layer of acceptance crucial to deep Zen understanding. We commonly assume acceptance means merely tolerating conditions we dislike. But authentic acceptance delves deeper. It means discovering that the very thing we initially resist might contain precisely the wisdom, strength, or beauty we desperately need. Daiki's personal journey, moving from sharp criticism to profound appreciation, perfectly mirrors our own lifelong process of learning to accept, not just external challenges, but those aspects of ourselves we harshly judge as flawed or inadequate. Much like the resilient, twisted pine, Every one of us carries scars collected from the storms we have weathered. We all possess parts of our personality, history, or body that deviate from our idealized self-image. Zen instructs us that these so-called imperfections are not obstacles impeding our awakening. On the contrary, they are the indispensable raw material from which awakening itself springs forth. Our deepest struggles are transmuted into authentic strength. Our wounds evolve into wellsprings of deep compassion. Our limitations become doorways inviting creativity and resourcefulness. The twisted tree survived the storms that shattered straighter ones specifically because it learned the necessity of bending. In precisely the same manner, our willingness to accept and compassionately work with our imperfections often makes us far more authentic, wise, and resilient than those who have never faced significant personal testing. This teaching radically transforms how we perceive every element of our lives that appears less than ideal. The demanding relationship that refines our patience. The unexpected health challenge that clarifies what truly matters. The painful failure that redirects us sharply toward our genuine, intended path. When we cease demanding that life strictly conform to our narrow preferences, we become open and available to receive the actual, transformative gifts it offers. The beginning of this deeper acceptance practice lies in cultivating curiosity rather than habitual judgment. When you notice something within yourself or your circumstances that you desperately wish to change, pause first. Ask, what vital lesson might this situation be imparting? How might this challenge be perfectly tailored to foster my current growth, even if it contradicts my desires? This approach certainly does not advocate for passivity or the abandonment of all effort toward improvement. The wise gardener still meticulously tends his formal gardens with skill and care. But crucially, he also recognizes and appreciates the wild, untamed beauty that naturally emerges when nature is given the freedom to follow its own deep wisdom. As you rest deeply now, internalize this powerful teaching. Bring awareness to any areas of your life where you have been expending energy fighting against reality, demanding that circumstances comply with your expectations. How might it feel to approach these difficulties with the same spirit of curiosity and appreciation that Daiki eventually brought to the twisted tree? Breathe gently, allowing this wisdom to seep into your physical being, much like nourishing rain saturating the dry earth. Tomorrow's challenges will indeed await you, but you are not obligated to greet them with resistance. You can meet them instead with the flexible, grounded strength of the ancient pine, bending deftly without ever breaking, discovering your own authentic way to thrive. Allow yourself to settle into this profound understanding. Acceptance is not an act of surrender or giving up. It is the essential foundation for all true and lasting transformation. When we cease fighting reality, we become available to dance harmoniously with it. And within this fluid dance, we discover expansive possibilities we could never have conceived while struggling against the current. Sleep arrives naturally to a mind that has learned the profound art of accepting what is. Rest deeply, secure in the knowledge that you are perfectly positioned to receive whatever lessons and teachings tomorrow may reveal. A young monk named Jiro resided in a monastery situated high in the mountains, where the atmosphere was thin, crisp, and crystal clear. Each morning before the sun rose, he would undertake a walk down a winding stone path to retrieve fresh water from a natural spring. The path was perilous, marked by loose rocks and steep cliffsides, yet Jiro had navigated this route hundreds of times. One morning, as he cautiously descended the mountain, he noticed an object glinting subtly in the faint light. Half buried beneath a fallen log lay a small, perfectly smooth river stone. But this was clearly no common stone. It seemed to possess an internal luminescence, and its surface bore natural patterns resembling ancient, intricate writing. Jiro picked up the stone and felt an unexpected warmth radiating through his hands. It was unlike any object he had ever encountered. Surely, he thought, this must be a sign. A precious gift from the cosmos intended solely for me. He carefully concealed the stone within his robes and continued toward the spring. Over the ensuing days, Jiro found himself incessantly feeling the stone resting in his pocket. During meditation, he would secretly cradle it in his palm. While working in the monastery gardens, he would habitually check to ensure it was secure. The stone began to consume an increasing amount of his mental attention. He lay awake at night pondering its mysterious origins. Was it genuinely magical? Did it possess some special, latent power? He started convincing himself that his meditation deepened when he held it, and that his tasks proceeded more smoothly when it was nearby. But accompanying this intense attachment came a corrosive worry. What if he carelessly lost it? What if another monk discovered it and attempted to seize it? Jiro began choosing circuitous routes solely to avoid contact with his brethren. He developed a compulsive habit of checking his pocket dozens of times throughout the day. The very object that had initially sparked such profound joy now utterly consumed him with relentless anxiety. One fateful morning, as Jiro hurried along the dangerous mountain path carrying his heavy water buckets, his foot snagged on an unstable stone. He stumbled and fell heavily, splashing water everywhere. As he frantically gathered the overturned buckets, he heard a small, chilling sound that made his heart freeze. The faint, gentle clink of stone against rock. His prized possession had slipped from his robes and was now rapidly rolling toward the sheer cliff edge. Jiro lunged forward in a desperate attempt to retrieve it, but he was too late. The smooth, precious stone tipped over the precipice and disappeared instantly into the misty depths of the valley far below. Jiro sat frozen on the rocky path, staring numbly at the exact spot where his treasure had vanished. All his painstaking attempts at guarding and protecting it had been utterly meaningless. In the span of a single second, the thing he had clung to most fiercely was gone forever. He braced himself for a crushing wave of devastation. But instead, an astonishing emotion washed over him. Pure relief. The relentless, nagging worry had vanished. The consuming need to protect, check, and hide had dissolved with the stone's descent. For the first time in weeks, his mind felt light, clear, and spacious. He realized with startling clarity that in his desperate struggle to hold onto the physical stone, he had unknowingly sacrificed something infinitely more valuable: his inner peace. As Jiro ascended the mountain path with his now empty buckets, he felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in months. The stone had been inherently beautiful, yes, but the constant anxiety it generated had constrained his life, making him fearful and small. Now, with pockets empty and his heart open, he was able to perceive the authentic, enduring magic that had always been present. The delicate morning mist dancing between the high peaks, the crisp sound of his own footsteps echoing on the age-old stones, the simple, steady rhythm of breathing the clean mountain air. That evening, Jiro sought out his teacher and recounted the entire saga. The master listened patiently, nodding gently in complete understanding. "The stone indeed offered you a precious teaching," the master remarked. "But the true lesson was not in the acquisition or the keeping of it. The profound lesson lay entirely in the loss of it. You discovered that your capacity for happiness was never contained within the stone itself. It resides permanently within your inherent ability to appreciate beauty the moment you encounter it. That ability, my son, cannot tumble off a cliff. It travels everywhere you go." The teacher offered a tender smile. "We operate under the delusion that we must physically possess the things we cherish. But turning love into possession inevitably transforms it into fear. When you genuinely love something, you must grant it the freedom to simply be. And in that mutual freedom, both you and the object of your love discover enduring peace." This deceptively simple story uncovers one of the most fundamentally transformative teachings within all Buddhist wisdom. We suffer not because we feel love or appreciation for the world, but because we compulsively attempt to own it. The precise moment we cling tightly to anything, be it a tangible object, a relationship, an ephemeral experience, or even a strongly held idea, we simultaneously sow the destructive seeds of our own anxiety. Jiro's ordeal clearly illustrates a profound truth about the nature of attachment. The stone, in isolation, was not the source of the problem. Beauty is naturally meant to be appreciated. Joy is meant to be fully felt. Yet, when appreciation morphs into possession, when spontaneous joy devolves into desperate clinging, we inevitably lose the very essence of what we were striving so hard to retain. The stone initially gifted Jiro a burst of pure happiness. Yet that happiness immediately evaporated the moment he made the conscious decision that he must possess it eternally. This teaching revolutionizes our engagement with everything we hold dear. Our most intimate relationships flourish and become more loving the moment we stop attempting to strictly control or manage them. Our experiences feel richer and more meaningful when we cease demanding that they persist eternally. Our material possessions bring greater joy when we hold them lightly in our grasp, fully appreciating their presence while we have them, and releasing them gracefully when their natural cycle concludes. The most profound, lasting peace is achieved, not by acquiring what we desire and securing it forever, but by learning the essential practice of appreciating what we already possess and willingly letting it go when the moment of release arrives. This principle is not a call to become emotionally cold or indifferent. It is an invitation to love so fully and completely that we genuinely desire what is best for the object of our affection, even if that necessitates allowing it the freedom to follow its own, independent path. Breathe softly now and notice how this understanding begins to settle deeply within your physical form. Observe how the mere thought of releasing your grip creates an immediate sensation of spaciousness and relief, akin to setting down a heavy backpack you have been needlessly carrying for miles. Let us delve further into this wisdom through one final narrative. A story demonstrating how the act of letting go can transform not only our relationship with external objects, but fundamentally change our relationship with ourselves. Master Aishin was universally recognized throughout the region as the most supremely skilled calligrapher of his generation. People journeyed for days specifically to commission his work, and his scrolls were revered treasures among both private collectors and ancient temples. His brushstrokes appeared to emanate directly from a divine source, manifesting characters of profound beauty and undeniable spiritual power. Aishin derived immense, careful pride from his intricate art. He would dedicate hours to grinding his inkstone to ensure the perfect consistency of the pigment, meticulously selecting the brushes with the ideal flexibility, and waiting patiently for the precise, unclouded mental state before initiating any crucial piece. His dedicated studio space was organized with painstaking care, every single tool resting in its exact, designated position. One vibrant spring morning, a wealthy merchant approached Aishin with a commission, a magnificent scroll intended for his daughter's imminent wedding. This was to be the most significant and demanding piece Aishin had ever undertaken, commensurate with the substantial fee offered. The merchant requested specific characters symbolizing eternal happiness, executed in Aishin's most elaborate and flawless style. Aishin dedicated several days purely to preparation. He undertook fasting rituals to purify his mind, mediated extensively to calm and settle his spirit, and tirelessly practiced the desired characters. Hundreds of times on common paper. When the moment felt truly right, he unrolled his finest silk scroll, carefully mixed his most precious ink, and chose his most cherished brush. As the tip of the brush touched the silk for the first stroke, he knew it was perfect. His hand moved with astonishing, fluid grace. The ink flowed across the surface like liquid moonlight, and the first character emerged with breathtaking beauty. Aishin's heart swelled with the quiet certainty of success. This, he thought, would be his definitive masterpiece, the work that would immortalize his name for generations to come. Yet, just as he was poised to begin the second character, disaster struck with brutal swiftness. A fierce gust of wind ripped through the open window, violently upending his ceramic water bowl. The water splattered violently across the delicate scroll, leaving a large, dark, spreading stain directly through the heart of his perfect initial character. Aishin stared at the defiled silk, paralyzed with horror. Weeks, months of mental preparation and painstaking practice had been undone in a single careless instant. The silk itself was incredibly costly and difficult to replace. The commission was vital to securing his professional future. But the most devastating loss was the absolute destruction of that single, flawless character he had just brought into being. His immediate, searing impulse was to rage, at the sudden violence of the wind, at his own foolish carelessness for leaving the window ajar, at the universe's cruel timing. He considered trying to blot or clean the scroll, but the damage inflicted upon the fine silk was clearly irreversible. Starting over was simply not an option. He possessed no more silk of this exceptional quality, and the patron merchant expected the finished work within mere days. As Aishin sat, numbly gazing at the ruined paper and feeling his aspirations for the perfect masterpiece shatter around him, a profound and unexpected shift occurred in his perception. He leaned closer, studying the water stain. It had dried into an organic, flowing shape, a spontaneous form that, strangely, seemed to complement the remnants of the character rather than obliterating it entirely. The stain possessed its own raw, inherent beauty, resembling a natural cloud formation or a rugged mountain silhouette glimpsed through mist. Rather than discarding the scroll in frustration, Aishin slowly reached for his brush again. He made a conscious decision to work with the accident, instead of fighting against its reality. He incorporated the sweeping watermark directly into his design, utilizing it as the fundamental structure for an entirely new kind of composition. Where his original blueprint had dictated measured, formal perfection, he now allowed the brush to create something vibrant, wild, and wholly spontaneous. The strokes he painted around and through the accidental mark possessed a dynamic freedom and untamed energy unlike anything in his previous work. He relinquished the need to control every single brush stroke, instead allowing his hand to respond naturally to the texture and flow already established on the silk. The disaster had transformed itself, becoming an unexpected partner in his creation, rather than its sworn enemy. When Aishin finally lifted his hand, he realized he had produced something significantly more compelling and beautiful than his meticulously crafted original design. The finished piece resonated with a vibrant life and innate movement that his previously careful, controlled style had consistently lacked. The water stain, which moments before had felt like utter ruin, had actually liberated him from the prison of his own perfectionism, allowing his authentic, uninhibited artistic spirit to finally manifest. The merchant was visibly stunned when he came to examine the finished work. "Master Aishin," he declared, his voice filled with awe, "I have long admired your art, but this piece transcends everything you have created before. How did you achieve such breathtaking, spontaneous beauty?" Aishin smiled gently, recalling the paralyzing horror of the initial accident. "I ceased trying to force perfection," he explained, "and instead started allowing perfection to create itself. The stain taught me a crucial lesson. My greatest adversary was not imperfection itself, but my crushing fear of it. Once I released my desperate need to control every detail, my art finally became truly alive." From that pivotal day forward, Aishin's approach to his entire life, and especially his work, was fundamentally altered. He continued to practice diligently and prepare meticulously, but he abandoned the attempt to impose predetermined outcomes onto the creative process. He learned instead to dance skillfully with accidents, to warmly welcome the unexpected intrusion, and to perceive apparent imperfection not as a fault, but as a potential doorway to deeper, more original creativity. This profound story beautifully illustrates how the act of letting go transforms not only our relationship with external circumstances but, more fundamentally, our relationship with our own efforts and internal expectations. Aishin discovered a potent paradox. His rigid attachment to achieving flawlessness was, in fact, the very element preventing him from creating truly masterful art. His deep-seated fear of making a mistake was the barrier that separated him from the spontaneous, living beauty that effortlessly emerges when we trust the inherent, natural flow of existence. This teaching resonates deeply within every corner of our daily existence. Consider how frequently we overlook genuine opportunities for joy because we are preoccupied with preemptively avoiding potential problems. How many relationships become strained, brittle, and exhausting because we attempt too forcefully to control how they develop or unfold. And how much vital creative energy do we squander trying to impose specific, fixed outcomes instead of responding fluidly and skillfully to the reality of what is actually happening? The wisdom of the Buddhist path instructs us that the majority of our suffering stems from battling against reality rather than gently flowing alongside it. The moment Aishin ceased fighting the intrusive water stain and began cooperating with it, he unlocked incredible creative possibilities he could never have pre-imagined. When we stop adamantly demanding that life conform precisely to our expectations and instead choose to engage creatively with whatever circumstances actually present themselves, we discover a depth of freedom and aliveness that is utterly unattainable through sheer control. This transformative realization is why letting go forms the very core of finding deep, enduring peace. It should never be misunderstood as giving up on life or adopting a state of passive indifference. Rather, it is the clear recognition that our tenacious grip on how things must be often blinds us to the subtle beauty that already exists. It is about trusting the deeper process, the conviction that life possesses an innate wisdom about unfolding that our anxious, worried minds simply cannot comprehend. The peace derived from this profound understanding is unshakable precisely because it is independent of whether external circumstances meet our desires. Whether the metaphorical stone falls off the cliff or remains safely in our pocket, whether the water spills on our precious scroll or remains in the bowl, we possess the internal capacity to find genuine contentment by engaging skillfully and wisely with whatever phenomena appear. As you allow yourself to rest now within this sanctuary of learning, let this teaching about acceptance and release gently settle into your awareness. Identify any areas in your life where you might be gripping too tightly, where your underlying fear of loss or potential imperfection is generating needless internal tension. What would it actually feel like to consciously loosen or soften that grip, even slightly? This practice is not an invitation to become careless or indifferent. Aishin maintained a deep respect for his art, just as Jiro held an appreciation for inherent beauty. However, when we manage to love something deeply without requiring complete possession, and when we care passionately without needing to dominate or control the outcome, we discover an exquisite way of being that is both intensely engaged and yet profoundly peaceful. Allow yourself to settle into this possibility. The deepest streams of Buddhist wisdom guide us toward this specific freedom, the capacity to hold life lightly while embracing its entirety. It is in this delicate balance between caring commitment and wise release, between deliberate effort and humble surrender, that we discover the peace that surpasses all conventional understanding. This is the peace that grants the body and mind the permission to rest completely, secure in the knowledge that whatever comes, we possess the internal wisdom and open heart necessary to meet it. In a quiet, small village nestled at the edge of a vast, brooding forest, lived a baker named Kenji, who was beloved throughout the community for his kind heart and unstinting generosity. Every morning, long before the first hint of dawn. He would diligently light his ovens and commence preparing the day's fresh bread. The comforting, warm scent of baking yeast and grain would slowly drift through the narrow village streets, gently rousing the inhabitants and filling them with quiet anticipation. Kenji maintained a simple, steadfast practice. He always baked several extra loaves each day and placed them on a worn wooden shelf just outside his shop, accompanied by a modest sign that read, "For those who need them, travelers, impoverished families, and anyone suffering from hunger could take what they required freely, without the humiliation of having to ask for charity or explaining their difficult circumstances." During one particularly harsh winter, when food became desperately scarce and many villagers were struggling just to survive, a small group of desperate men began ruthlessly stealing from local shops and homes. They would arrive under the cloak of night, snatching whatever provisions they could find. The village quickly descended into fear, prompting residents to lock their doors and hide their few valuables. Kenji's shop, despite his generosity, was raided 3 times within a 2-week span. Each time, the thieves took not only the free bread from the shelf but also cash from his till and bags of flour from his supplies. The third incident was the most destructive. They deliberately broke several of his essential baking tools and aggressively overturned his neatly organized workspace. The other villagers were predictably outraged, loudly voicing their indignation on Kenji's behalf. "You must immediately stop leaving bread outside," they insisted. "You are only encouraging this criminal behavior. Install thick bars on your windows. Get a fierce guard dog. You must demonstrate to these criminals that you will not remain an easy, passive target." But Kenji remained resolute and quietly maintained his practice. Every morning, he would calmly clean up the debris, repair whatever damage he could manage, and bake his bread following his usual routine. He continued to place the extra loaves on the shelf outside, where they now disappeared almost instantly. One bitterly cold night, Kenji was working past midnight, kneading the dough required for the next day's baking. He heard a distinct, furtive noise at his front door and saw vague shadows shifting outside. Instead of immediately hiding or shouting for assistance, Kenji performed an action that surprised even his own measured temperament. He simply walked over and opened the door wide. 3 men stood frozen in the bitter cold, their faces alarmingly gaunt from starvation and their clothes ragged from extended exposure in the winter forest. They were clearly intending to steal again, but they instantly froze when they found themselves looking directly into Kenji's calm, steady gaze. "You must be extremely hungry," Kenji murmured softly, "to be forced out on such a freezing night." The men were utterly silenced, unsure how to process the encounter. They had anticipated an empty shop, a quick theft, and an easy retreat back into the shadows. They had certainly not prepared for kindness. "I happen to have a pot of fresh, hot soup simmering," Kenji continued without raising his voice, "and there is warm bread that has just come out of the oven. Would you consider coming inside to eat?" The oldest of the 3, who appeared to be the leader, eyed him with profound suspicion. "Why in the world would you help us?" he demanded. "Don't you realize who we are? We are the ones who have been stealing from you." Kenji gave a calm, measured nod. "I know exactly who you are, and I also observe that you take only what you require to survive. A person does not steal bread because his nature is evil. He steals bread because his stomach is empty." He stepped aside and gestured invitingly for them to enter the warm bakery. "The winter is harsh for all of us," he said gently. "But that hardship does not require us to become enemies." Slowly and with great caution, the 3 men shuffled into the comforting warmth of the bakery. Kenji served them generous bowlfuls of steaming hot soup and piles of fresh, soft bread until they could eat no more. As the warmth penetrated their cold bodies and their empty stomachs filled, They tentatively began to share their story. All three had been left jobless when the local mine permanently shut down. With no other work to be found and their savings completely depleted, they had been forced into a desperate existence living rough in the harsh forest. They confessed that they had tried pleading for help, but the fearful villagers had aggressively chased them away. Stealing truly felt like our only remaining option for survival, the youngest man admitted, his eyes welling up with tears. We never intended to hurt anyone. We simply couldn't face starving to death. Kenji listened to their entire account with unwavering, deep attention. Once they had finished eating, Kenji presented them with an offer that left them utterly astonished. I could certainly use some reliable help with the early morning baking, he offered. The work is physically demanding and the hours are long, but there will always be sufficient food, and there is a warm, dry room above the shop where you can sleep. If you are willing to work, you are welcome to stay here. The three men exchanged wide-eyed glances, unable to comprehend the opportunity. They had arrived intending to steal from this man, and he was offering them employment and safe haven. The oldest man slowly shook his head, struggling to speak. But why would you ever trust us? We have actively robbed you multiple times. Kenji's smile was gentle and steady. Because I hold the belief that people will instinctively do better when they are afforded the genuine chance to do better. You resorted to theft because you were desperate. But desperation is not your true identity. It was merely a brutal situation you found yourselves trapped in. The men accepted the offer and remained. They proved to be the hardest working, most dedicated employees Kenji had ever employed, endlessly grateful for the opportunity to earn an honest livelihood. Within just a few months, the bakery thrived and became more prosperous than ever before. The village benefited from increased safety, and the former thieves transformed into respected, contributing members of the community. Years afterward, when people would inevitably ask Kenji why he had chosen radical kindness over harsh punishment, he would calmly reply, "Fear only breeds more fear. Anger only generates more anger." But true compassion holds the potent power to transform even the most seemingly intractable or difficult situations. When we choose to respond to suffering with sincere understanding rather than immediate judgment, we grant everyone involved the profound chance to rise above their past behavior and become better than they were before. This seemingly simple tale discloses something profoundly fundamental about the nature of compassion within Buddhist philosophy. Genuine compassion is far more than simply feeling sympathy for others or being pleasant when circumstances are convenient. It is the wisdom to clearly perceive that underlying every harmful or destructive action lies some fundamental form of suffering, coupled with the courage to respond to that suffering with understanding and support, rather than demanding immediate retribution or punishment. Kenji possessed a crucial insight that the other villagers entirely overlooked. The thieves were not inherently wicked people who enjoyed inflicting pain. They were fellow human beings trapped in truly desperate circumstances, driven to act out of deep pain and overwhelming need, not out of inherent malice. By meeting their actions with compassion instead of righteous anger, he skillfully created the precise conditions necessary for authentic, lasting transformation. This vital teaching demonstrates unequivocally that compassion is neither a form of weakness nor a mark of naivety. In fact, it is an immensely powerful force capable of fundamentally changing situations that appear utterly hopeless. When we meet aggression with reciprocal aggression, we merely ensure the escalation of conflict. However, when we can cultivate the clarity to look through a person's harmful behavior and recognize the underlying pain that drives it, we open a pathway to healing for every individual involved. The deep, internal peace offered by Buddhist teachings flows, in part, directly from this understanding. When we train ourselves to respond to difficulty with inherent compassion, we cease contributing our own layers of anger and fear to the existing suffering of the world. Instead, we transition into becoming active agents of healing and profound transformation. Importantly, this approach does not imply tolerating harmful behavior or placing ourselves in unnecessary danger. It means operating from the understanding that truly lasting solutions materialize when we address the fundamental root causes of problems, rather than merely reacting superficially to their most obvious symptoms. Take a deep, gentle breath right now and observe how this deep understanding begins to settle within your own heart center. Notice that even the contemplation of responding to difficulty with pure compassion instantly generates a sense of spaciousness and profound calm, as though a long-held, tight knot in your chest has started to gently loosen. Let us explore this vital wisdom further through a third story, one that illustrates how compassion directed inward, toward ourselves, can prove just as radically transformative as the compassion we offer to others. There once was a meditation student named Mickey, who traveled to study at a remote mountain temple renowned specifically for its rigorous and disciplined practice. She had heard impressive accounts of the resident monks, who could sit in perfect stillness for many hours, their minds flawlessly clear like alpine lakes, and their hearts overflowing with an almost boundless peace. Mickey desperately yearned to attain this identical level of spiritual mastery. Mickey immediately hurled herself into the practice with a fierce, almost punishing determination. She habitually woke at 3 o'clock in the morning to begin her private meditation before any other student stirred. She would remain seated in silence throughout mealtimes, attempting to contemplate spiritual teachings rather than nourish her body. She compulsively pushed herself to meditate for periods far exceeding everyone else, frequently remaining seated until her legs were completely numb and her back was screaming in terrible pain. Yet, instead of achieving the sought-after peace and mental clarity, Mickey discovered that her mind became more agitated, critical, and aggressive than ever before. During her meditation sessions, rather than observing her thoughts with detached, gentle awareness, she would savagely attack each wandering thought with a stream of harsh inner criticism. "Focus!" she would aggressively command herself internally. "Stop being so undisciplined. Every other student here can manage this effortlessly. What exactly is wrong with you?" Whenever she felt her meditation session was fragmented or scattered, she would impose self-punishment by deliberately skipping meals or enforcing additional hours of painful sitting. If she felt drowsy during practice, she would mercilessly scold herself for being lazy and fundamentally weak. Her internal dialogue had devolved into a relentless, constant stream of brutal self-judgment and overwhelming disappointment. After enduring months of this harsh, self-inflicted treatment, Mickey was infinitely more miserable than she had been upon arrival. Her body had grown noticeably thin from her deliberate skipping of meals. Her mind was utterly exhausted from the incessant barrage of self-criticism, and her heart felt profoundly heavy, weighed down by the shame of her perceived spiritual failures. One morning, following an especially torturous meditation session where she had relentlessly berated herself for every single wandering thought, Mickey retreated to the temple's small, quiet garden, intending to weep in solitude. She slumped beneath a beautiful cherry tree, consumed by the agonizing conviction that she was a complete failure as a spiritual student. Master Yuki, the temple's revered elderly teacher, happened to be making her quiet rounds through the garden. She immediately observed Mickey's profound distress and sat down silently beside her on the cool stone bench. "Tell me about your practice," Master Yuki invited, her voice filled with gentle understanding. Through fresh tears, Mickey poured out the torrent of her frustration. She detailed her impossibly rigorous schedule, her unrelenting self-criticism, and her crushing disappointment over her perceived lack of progress. "I try so incredibly hard," she sobbed uncontrollably, "but I am simply not good enough. I will never achieve the stillness that the other students have. Perhaps I should just abandon the path entirely." Master Yuki listened with an expression of unwavering, compassionate silence. When Mickey finally finished speaking, the teacher calmly pointed toward a small bird that had just landed near their feet. The bird was hopping and pecking patiently at the soil, diligently searching for scattered seeds and insects. "Observe this little bird," Master Yuki instructed softly. "See how naturally and spontaneously it moves. It does not pause to criticize itself for not finding food quickly enough. It certainly doesn't waste time comparing its search to that of other birds. It simply executes the activity of a bird moment by moment, with absolute, complete acceptance of its own nature." Mickey watched the bird intently for several minutes, deeply struck by its seemingly effortless presence and profound natural grace. "Now," Master Yuki continued, her voice drawing Mickey back, "imagine if this bird spent all its precious time telling itself it was a terrible, inferior bird, that it absolutely must fly higher or sing with more technical beauty. What tragic consequence would this self-criticism have on its natural, vital ability to find the food and shelter it requires? What would happen to the bird's inherent joy in the simple act of existing as itself?" Mickey immediately grasped the core lesson. "It would be far too preoccupied tearing itself down," she whispered, "to actually perform the things it naturally knows how to do." Master Yuki nodded slowly, confirming the realization. "You traveled here seeking to learn deep peace and boundless compassion. Yet the very first location where these qualities must be applied is within your own being. How can you possibly extend genuine kindness toward others if you show nothing but brutal harshness toward your own aching heart? How can you expect to find serenity in meditation if you are actively waging war against your own mind?" The teacher's voice was now permeated with gentle warmth. "The true path to awakening is not, fundamentally, about striving to become flawless or perfect. It is, first and foremost, about becoming kind to yourself initially and subsequently kind to all beings. Your mind will inevitably wander during meditation. This is precisely what the mind is biologically designed to do. The actual practice is not to violently suppress or stop this natural wandering, but rather to notice it arise with the same gentle, patient affection you would naturally show a beloved young child who momentarily gets distracted while learning the difficult task of walking. From that profoundly moving day onward, Mickey completely revolutionized her approach to spiritual practice. Instead of harshly commanding her mind to concentrate, she would softly and gently invite it back to the anchor of her breath. Instead of criticizing her naturally wandering thoughts, she learned to acknowledge them simply with neutral internal phrases like thinking or planning, and then return to her meditation with an attitude of profound kindness. When her body signaled fatigue, instead of grimly pushing through with sheer willpower, she would consciously adjust her posture or grant herself a brief, necessary break, treating her physical needs with sincere respect. When difficult emotions surfaced during her sitting practice, instead of judging them as impediments or obstacles, she would breathe with them compassionately, exactly as she might tenderly comfort a friend who was deeply distressed. The resulting transformation was nothing short of remarkable. Within just a few weeks, Mickey's meditation sessions grew naturally deeper and significantly more peaceful. Her mind, now free from the trauma of constant internal warfare, began to naturally settle into the state of stillness she had been seeking all along. Even more crucially, the harsh, relentless inner critic that had tormented her for years gradually subsided, softening into a comforting voice of gentle encouragement and steady support. Years later, Mickey herself became celebrated for her exceptionally compassionate teaching style and her unique ability to gently guide struggling students toward genuine inner peace. When questioned about the core of her methodology, she would respond, "I learned the hard way that the foundational kindness we extend to ourselves becomes the necessary bedrock for all the kindness we attempt to offer the world. We fundamentally cannot give what we do not already possess, and we can never achieve true peace through conflict, especially when that conflict is solely waged within ourselves. This inspiring story illuminates one of the most essential, powerful teachings within Buddhism regarding compassion. It establishes that before we can effectively assist others or locate lasting internal peace, we are obliged to first learn to treat our own selves with the identical level of gentleness, patience, and understanding we would readily offer to a person we deeply cherish. The unfortunate truth is that most of us harbor an inner critic whose voice is far harsher and more condemning than we would ever dare use toward a close friend. This internalized violence tragically prevents us from accessing our innate wisdom and natural state of peace. Mickey's arduous journey vividly demonstrates that self-compassion is not equivalent to self-indulgence or weakly making excuses for laziness. Instead, it is the powerful recognition that human beings learn, adapt, and grow infinitely more effectively within an atmosphere of kindness and encouragement than in an environment saturated with ceaseless, crushing judgment. When we finally cease waging war against our inevitable human imperfections, our minds naturally, effortlessly settle back into the profound peace that has always existed beneath the surface of the conflict. This deeply compassionate teaching radically transforms every aspect of how we approach both spiritual practice and personal growth. Instead of attempting to bludgeon ourselves into enlightenment through rigid, harsh discipline, we consciously create the ideal conditions for awakening through the combination of gentle persistence and unwavering, loving patience. Much like a garden that flourishes under steady, mindful care rather than brutal, violent digging, our hearts and minds thrive and blossom only when they are tended with profound compassion. The Buddhist path teaches that the pain of suffering often arises from our forceful resistance to our current experience. When Mickey fought desperately against her own wandering mind, she generated exponentially more suffering than the mere existence of the thoughts ever could. When she finally learned to accept her natural mental patterns with kindness, that very same mind, which had previously seemed chaotic and uncontrollable, began to spontaneously reveal its innate clarity. This understanding delivers a tremendous sense of profound relief, because it means we are not required to be flawless or perfect in order to be inherently worthy of love and peace. We are not obligated to eliminate every one of our human flaws before we can even begin the vital work of helping others. We are simply required to learn to meet our imperfections, our entire complex selves, with the identical compassionate understanding that we would immediately extend to any other suffering being. As you rest deeply in this teaching now, observe how your physical body responds to the idea of treating yourself with complete, unqualified kindness. Feel how merely entertaining the possibility of ending the internal war instantly creates a palpable sense of softening and immense relief. This posture is not equivalent to laziness or a facile lowering of standards. It is, instead, the sophisticated recognition that love, self-acceptance, is a vastly more potent, sustainable force for transformation than fear or self-punishment. The deep compassion that originates within ourselves naturally and effortlessly radiates outward to embrace all other beings. When we cease perpetually judging our own internal struggles, we find ourselves becoming infinitely more patient with the difficulties faced by others. When we successfully learn the art of forgiving our own human mistakes, we organically develop the immense capacity to forgive those who have caused us pain. When we finally recognize that our own suffering deserves gentle understanding rather than harsh punishment, we begin to see clearly that the exact same truth applies universally to everyone else. The profound peace that these teachings ultimately offer derives entirely from this fundamental shift in how we choose to meet life's inevitable difficulties. Instead of aggressively fighting against problems or harshly judging ourselves for experiencing them, we learn to lovingly embrace whatever arises with the tender, unwavering care of a mother cradling her child. Within this compassionate embrace, transformation occurs naturally and completely, generated not through aggressive force, but through pure, accepting love. Allow yourself to settle fully into this liberating possibility now. Imagine what it would feel like to move through tomorrow carrying the same radical kindness toward yourself that Master Yuki modeled for Mickey. Observe how this cultivated inner gentleness instantly creates expansive space, allowing genuine wisdom and profound peace to naturally surface. This is the ultimate gift offered by Buddhist teachings. Not merely a collection of techniques for superficial improvement, but a completely new, transformative way of relating to ourselves and our immediate experience. A path that inevitably guides us toward the profound sense of rest and deep tranquility that arises when the heart finally knows it is safe to settle into peace. Our tale begins with a young tea merchant named Taro, who journeyed tirelessly from one village to the next, trading the most exquisite teas harvested from distant, high-altitude mountains. His robust wooden cart was always brimming with meticulously wrapped packages of premium green tea, robust black tea, and those rare, delicate flowering teas that unfurled dramatically like blossoms when steeped in hot water. Taro was justly proud of his comprehensive knowledge of tea, and he possessed a genuine knack for pairing every customer with the perfect, personalized blend. Yet, despite his professional acumen, Taro harbored a significant internal struggle. His mind was relentlessly occupied with anything other than the present moment. While he was walking through one village, his thoughts would already be racing ahead to the next stop on his route. When engaged in conversation with customers about the subtle nuances of his teas, he was simultaneously calculating potential profits or anxiously monitoring the sky, worrying about the weather conditions for his travels the next day. Even when sitting down to enjoy his evening meal, he would be mentally planning the following day's itinerary or obsessively replaying old conversations from hours before. This unceasing mental treadmill left Taro feeling perpetually exhausted and psychologically fragmented. It was common for him to arrive at a new village, only to realize he had no conscious recollection of the journey he had just completed. He would conclude sales conversations and instantly forget the customers' names or the specific varieties they had chosen. His entire existence had become a restless, continuous blur of motion, utterly devoid of genuine satisfaction or inner peace. One late afternoon, Taro finally reached a small mountain village just as the sun dipped below the horizon. He was utterly spent from the arduous day of travel and desperately needed lodging for the night. As he slowly pulled his heavy cart through the quiet, darkening streets, his attention was drawn to a modest tea house, distinguished by the comforting, warm light that spilled invitingly from its paper windows. Inside, he saw an elderly woman seated alone at a low wooden table, meticulously preparing tea with movements that were incredibly careful and profoundly deliberate. Her entire presence immediately captured Taro's focus. She appeared utterly absorbed in her task, as though the whole world consisted solely of the sacred, unfolding tea ceremony before her. Taro knocked softly on the door and asked if he might possibly find shelter there for the evening. The woman, whose name was Sachiko, greeted him with genuine warmth and invited him to be seated while she completed the preparation of her tea. "I am a tea merchant," Taro announced, sinking his weary body onto a floor cushion. "I carry exquisite teas sourced from all corners of the region. Perhaps you would be interested in sampling some of my very finest premium varieties?" Sachiko offered a gentle smile but maintained her slow, meditative rhythm of movements. "Thank you kindly for your generous offer," she replied. "But first, might I ask you to join me in drinking this tea I have already prepared? It is only simple green tea, nothing remotely fancy." Taro agreed, though he internally chafed at the missed opportunity to showcase his superior premium selections. Sachiko carefully poured the liquid into 2 small, unadorned clay cups, placing one before him. She then slowly lifted her own cup and took a deep, deeply appreciative sip. Taro quickly lifted his cup and took a swift draught, already preparing a mental commentary on the tea's quality and suggestions for improvement. Before he could utter a word, Sachiko softly inquired, "What did you taste?" The direct simplicity of the question caught Taro completely off guard. "Well, it is green tea," he began, slipping into his professional routine. "Decent quality, certainly, although I stock much superior varieties in my cart. The leaves, ideally, should have been harvested earlier in the season for a more delicate flavor profile." "And no," Sachiko gently interrupted, "I did not ask you to analyze the tea or to compare it to others. I asked you what sensation you experienced right now in your mouth. What is the actual, immediate taste?" Taro paused, genuinely confused by her persistence. He raised the cup once more and took another sip, making a conscious effort to focus solely on the physical sensations. Yet, his mind immediately defaulted to its deeply ingrained pattern of comparison and critical evaluation. "Try once more," Sachiko softly suggested. "But this time, drink as if you have never encountered tea before. Drink as though this is truly the first sip of tea in your entire life." Taro found the instruction profoundly strange, yet the profound peace emanating from the woman's presence inspired him to genuinely attempt the exercise. He lifted the clay cup with excruciating slowness and took the tiniest possible sip. Instead of letting his thoughts analyze the beverage, he attempted to simply absorb the experience entirely through sensation. For the very first time, he registered the comforting warmth spreading across his tongue. He noticed the subtle astringency that produced a slight dryness in his mouth. He detected a fleeting hint of sweetness that lingered after the initial trace of bitterness dissipated. There was an unmistakable, earthy quality, reminiscent of the cool morning mist hovering above the mountain forests he knew so well. "Now, what did you taste?" Sachiko inquired gently. "I actually tasted the tea," Taro replied, genuinely surprised by the simplicity of his realization. "Not my rapid-fire thoughts about the tea, but the living tea itself." Sachiko nodded slowly, a clear look of approval on her face. "Most people," she observed, "spend their entire lives drinking tea without ever truly tasting it. They are perpetually preoccupied with thinking about the tea, comparing it endlessly to past brews, or judging immediately whether they approve of the flavor, and in doing so, they completely bypass the direct, simple experience of drinking." She poured him a fresh cup. "Try again. This time, also observe the feeling of holding the warm, comforting cup in your hands. Notice the physical sensation of swallowing the liquid. Pay close attention to the delicate steam rising visibly from the surface." Taro spent the following hour drinking tea with a degree of focused attention he had never brought to any activity. Each deliberate sip naturally evolved into a small, calming meditation. He clearly noticed how his breathing rhythm instinctively deepened and slowed down when he committed completely to the present moment. His previously frantic, racing thoughts gradually settled into a quiet, simple appreciation for the reality of what was actually occurring. "This is how I learned to find peace," Sachiko told him as the evening shadows lengthened. "It was not achieved by changing my external circumstances, but by simply choosing to show up fully and completely for whatever was already present. I have been preparing tea in this exact, simple manner for 30 years, and I continue to discover something fresh and new every single time, because I remain truly present for the experience." That night, Taro experienced a sleep deeper and more restorative than he had known in months. The next morning, as he made ready to resume his journey, he realized that his entire perception of the world had subtly shifted. While loading his cart, he keenly noticed the specific weight and texture of each carefully wrapped package. As he walked through the quiet village streets, he heard the distinct, lively songs of birds that he had routinely missed before. The crisp morning air felt clean, fresh, and vividly alive against his skin. From that transformative day onward, Taro's entire approach to his work underwent a radical change. Instead of frantically rushing through his hours with his attention scattered elsewhere, he diligently began to practice the lesson Sachiko had modeled for him. When engaging with customers, he listened completely and fully to their actual words, rather than mentally drafting his subsequent sales pitch. As he journeyed from village to village, he attentively observed the shifting landscape, the physical feeling of his feet connecting with the path, and the steady rhythm of his own breathing. This simple but powerful shift in the quality of his attention transformed not only Taro's internal experience of his profession, but also significantly improved his success as a merchant. Customers naturally began to seek him out because they felt genuinely heard and deeply understood during their conversations. His authentic presence fostered trust, and his careful, mindful attention enabled him to precisely match each person with the exact tea variety best suited to their individual tastes and needs. Years later, when people inquired about the source of his peaceful contentment, Taro would share a profound truth. I learned that genuine happiness is not something you find by searching frantically elsewhere. It is something you discover simply by choosing to be completely and totally where you already are. This entire narrative beautifully reveals one of Buddhism's most practical and deeply transformative core teachings: the practice of mindfulness or sati, which means bringing complete, undistracted attention to the present moment. Most of us navigate our lives much like Taro did before his encounter with Sachiko. Our physical bodies may reside in one location, but our restless minds are often racing somewhere else entirely. As a result, we routinely eat our food without tasting its flavor, we walk through the world without truly seeing it, and we engage in conversation without ever genuinely listening. This habit of divided attention represents a major, self-inflicted source of suffering, as it actively prevents us from ever feeling fully satisfied or truly at peace. When we are constantly obsessing over the next task or event, we inevitably overlook the profound richness and potential joy available to us right now. When our attention is chronically scattered between regretful memories of the past and anxious projections of the future, we lose the opportunity to simply rest in the stable reality of the current moment. The Buddhist understanding of mindfulness is crucial here. It is not fundamentally about emptying the mind of all thoughts or striving to achieve some esoteric, special state of consciousness. Rather, it is about training ourselves to be entirely present for whatever is unfolding right now, whether that activity is as simple as drinking tea, engaging in a meaningful conversation, or merely attending to the process of breathing. This level of complete attention naturally generates inner peace because it effectively halts the relentless mental churning and restlessness that leaves us perpetually unsettled and searching for more. Taro discovered that an activity he had performed thousands of times, drinking tea, could be transformed into a profound source of deep, unexpected satisfaction simply by dedicating his full presence to it. This demonstrates a vital truth. We do not require a change in our external circumstances to find peace. We only need to transform the quality of attention we bring to those circumstances. The dedicated practice of mindfulness effortlessly transforms ordinary, mundane moments into powerful opportunities for rest, renewal, and spiritual nourishment. When we consume food with full, appreciative attention, each meal becomes nourishing for both the body and the spirit. When we listen with complete, open presence, our relationships automatically grow deeper and exponentially more meaningful. When we commit mindful attention to any activity, that activity itself becomes a gentle form of meditation that naturally settles and calms the restless mind. Take a slow, gentle breath right now and truly feel the sensation of being completely present for this simple, automatic act of breathing. Notice the immediate way your mind naturally quiets when you focus entirely on what is unfolding in the current instant. This inherent quietude is the peace that Buddhist teachings promise, not as some distant, unattainable goal, but as the natural, inevitable result of paying careful, continuous attention to life as it unfolds, moment after precious moment. Let us further explore this wisdom through a second story that clearly illustrates how the practice of mindfulness can transform even our most difficult and challenging experiences. Master Josen was renowned throughout the region for his remarkable ability to remain perfectly calm and deeply centered, regardless of the chaos or events swirling around him. Students often traveled great distances from remote temples just to study with him, hoping desperately to uncover the secret to his legendary, unshakable peace. However, Master Josen's most devoted student, a young monk named Kaku, found himself struggling with persistent doubt regarding his teacher's reputation. Kaku had been residing at the temple for 2 years, and while he recognized Josen as wise and benevolent, he had never witnessed the master confronting any genuine adversity. The temple grounds were tranquil, the community lived in harmony, and their daily routine was predictable and utterly serene. Kaku privately questioned whether his teacher's acclaimed calmness was merely a byproduct of living in such perfectly ideal, protected conditions. Anyone can be peaceful in a place like this, Kaku confided one day to his close friend. But what would truly happen if Master Josen were forced to face real, life-altering problems? Would he maintain that stillness if his entire world were violently turned upside down? One cool autumn morning, Kaku's skeptical question was answered with dramatic and devastating suddenness. A messenger arrived at the temple gates bearing terrible, heartbreaking news. Bandits had raided Master Josen's home village during the night. His elderly mother and younger brother, who still lived there, had been violently killed in the attack, and the family home where Josen had spent his childhood was burned completely to the ground. Kaku watched his teacher's face with intense scrutiny as he absorbed this absolutely devastating report. For one visible, painful moment, Josen's eyes filled instantly with tears, and his posture seemed to visibly collapse under the weight of his grief. But then, something truly remarkable occurred. Instead of falling into despair or erupting in rage against the tragedy, Josen simply walked to a nearby stone bench, sat down, and began to breathe slowly and profoundly deeply. "Master," the messenger said, urgency thick in his voice, "shouldn't you depart immediately? There may be critical arrangements to make or ceremonies that need to be planned." Josen nodded gently. "Yes, I will certainly go. But first," he replied, "I require a few moments here to be fully present with this news and to truly absorb what this loss means." Kaku watched, absolutely amazed. His revered teacher was confronting the worst possible human tragedy, yet he was neither running around frantically nor collapsing in despair. Instead, he sat quietly, dedicating careful attention to the raw sensations of his own grief and deep shock. After several minutes of centered, silent breathing, Josen stood up, perfectly composed. "Kaku," he instructed, "please accompany me. We will travel to my village together." Throughout the long, difficult journey, Kaku expected his teacher to be entirely consumed by sorrow or distracted by painful planning. Instead, he observed that Josen appeared more present and intensely attentive than he had ever been before. When they paused to rest, Josen took time to truly notice the vibrant, changing colors of the autumn foliage. When they met other travelers on the road, he listened to their accounts and stories with profound, complete attention. And when they shared their simple meals, he ate with a clear, obvious appreciation for the nourishment the food provided. "Master?" Kaku finally asked, unable to suppress his mounting confusion. "How is it possible for you to notice such small, ordinary things when something so unimaginably terrible has occurred? Shouldn't you be too deeply upset to dedicate attention to anything else?" Josen halted his steps and looked at his student with eyes that conveyed both profound, visible sadness and an unshakable inner peace. "Kaku," he responded gently, This is precisely the moment when mindful attention is needed most. When we are completely overwhelmed by tragedy, our immediate, instinctive reaction is to try and escape the pain of the present moment. We become hopelessly lost in endless thoughts of what we should have done differently, or we anxiously project into the future, imagining all the devastating ways our lives will be ruined by this loss. He motioned toward the forest path they were traversing. But escaping into elaborate mental stories about the past or the future serves absolutely no purpose and helps no one. My mother and brother are gone, and no measure of frantic mental anguish will ever succeed in bringing them back. What I can actually do is honor their memory by remaining fully present for whatever demands my attention in this moment. Right now. Joshu carefully picked up a single fallen maple leaf and gently studied its intricate network of veins. If I spend this entire journey lost in paralyzing thoughts of regret or worry, he continued, I will inevitably miss the opportunity to appreciate the small beauties they would have wanted me to observe. If I am too distracted by my own pain to listen carefully to the people we encounter, I might overlook vital chances to offer assistance to someone in need. He looked directly into Kaku's eyes. Mindfulness is absolutely not about avoiding difficult emotions or engaging in the pretense that everything is perfectly fine. It is about being fully present for the totality of life, which necessarily includes the painful, agonizing parts. When I choose to sit with my grief mindfully, I can experience it completely and fully without being utterly destroyed or overwhelmed by its power. When I remain present, even amidst sorrow, I stay available to respond thoughtfully and wisely to whatever needs my immediate attention and care. When they finally arrived at the devastated village, Kaku witnessed his teacher's wisdom in profound action. Because Joshu was entirely present for every conversation, every necessary decision, he was able to offer genuine comfort to other grieving families, arrange deeply meaningful ceremonies, and handle complex practical matters with striking clarity and compassion. His practiced, mindful attention allowed him to be truly and effectively helpful during a time when nearly everyone else was too overwhelmed by shock to think rationally. That evening, as they sat together near the fresh graves of his mother and brother, Joshu wept softly, but even his tears possessed a different quality than ordinary crying. They flowed naturally, without the desperate, clinging attachment or bitter resentment that so often accompanies deep sorrow. He was fully present for his sorrow without allowing the sorrow to completely consume him. Now I understand, Kaku whispered softly. You are not peaceful because you are spared from problems. You are peaceful because you possess the wisdom to be completely present with whatever problems arise. Joshu simply nodded in affirmation. Mindfulness, he explained, does not possess the power to make difficulties miraculously disappear, but it actively prevents us from amplifying our difficulties by fighting desperately against them or attempting to flee from them. When we learn to stay present, even in the midst of profound pain, we make the incredible discovery that we are far stronger and much more resilient than we ever imagined possible. This profound story clearly illustrates that mindfulness is not merely a fair-weather practice, useful only when life is proceeding smoothly. It is, in fact, especially invaluable during our most challenging and difficult times, precisely because it stops us from adding layers of mental and emotional turmoil to the already significant difficulties we are confronting. Joshu's grounded response to tragedy demonstrates clearly that being present does not require us to be emotionless or coldly detached. He experienced his grief completely and authentically, but he refused to become lost or entangled within it. He fully felt his sorrow without permitting it to seize control of his entire being. This balance is the middle way taught in Buddhism, neither suppressing our natural human emotions nor allowing ourselves to be utterly overwhelmed and drowned by them. When we confront loss, deep disappointment, or sudden crisis, our minds possess a habit of making things exponentially worse by spinning dramatic narratives about how terrible everything is, how unjustly unfair life has been, or how impossible it will be to ever recover from the setback. These purely mental additions to our raw, actual experience create far greater suffering than the original problem or event could ever inflict on its own. Mindful presence offers a fundamentally different, healthier way to encounter difficulty. Instead of desperately fighting against painful emotions or passively allowing ourselves to drown in them, we can learn to simply be present with them. When we choose to breathe with our sadness rather than resisting its existence, and when we acknowledge our fear without being paralyzed or controlled by it, we quickly discover that we are capable of handling far more than we previously thought possible. This potent teaching provides immense relief because it means we do not have to postpone our inner peace until life somehow magically becomes problem-free. We possess the innate ability to find deep peace even while standing in the midst of formidable challenges, simply by staying present for what is actually occurring, instead of becoming hopelessly lost in our own mental narratives about what is occurring. The Buddhist path wisely recognizes that suffering is an inevitable, natural component of human life. However, it also teaches us that the vast majority of our suffering stems from our persistent resistance to the reality of the present moment. When we cultivate the skill of meeting each moment with mindful, gentle attention, even profoundly difficult moments become workable and manageable. We cease wasting precious energy fighting against what is already here, and can instead redirect that energy toward responding to the situation wisely and with genuine compassion. As you settle into this powerful understanding, take a moment to feel how the consistent practice of presence generates an unmistakable sense of groundedness and internal stability. Even if your life currently contains significant challenges or deep uncertainties, this moment, right now, is perfectly manageable. You have the capacity to breathe with whatever you are experiencing. You can choose to be fully present for your own life as it unfolds, not as you wish it were, but exactly as it is. This is the extraordinary gift that mindfulness offers. Not the elimination of all life's difficulties, but the profound discovery that we can meet any problem with unwavering awareness and quiet grace. It is not a guarantee that life will always remain comfortable, but the acquisition of the inner wisdom required to find deep peace regardless of what life delivers. When we finally learn how to rest completely within the present moment, we unlock the deep, abiding peace that these ancient Buddhist teachings have been guiding us toward all along. High in the remote mountains, there resided an acclaimed scholar named Hayato, a man who had consecrated his entire life to the exhaustive study of Buddhist philosophy. His modest house was completely packed from floor to ceiling with towering stacks of ancient texts, scholarly commentaries, and volumes of teachings representing every known school of Buddhist thought. Hayato possessed the ability to recite complex philosophical arguments entirely from memory and could expound upon the most subtle points of doctrine with breathtaking, impressive precision. Hayato meticulously spent his days immersed in reading, detailed note-taking, and composing his own dense commentaries on the monumental works of Buddhist literature. He had secured a well-deserved reputation as one of the most comprehensively learned Buddhist scholars in the entire region. Periodically, students would undertake the arduous trek to his isolated mountain retreat, hoping to absorb some measure of his vast, accumulated knowledge. Yet, despite the sheer scope of his immense learning, Hayato felt an acute, nagging sense that something essential was missing. His understanding of the teachings was theoretically comprehensive, but in reality, he often felt just as confused about the fundamental challenges of life as any layperson. When confronted with simple daily problems or difficult emotional states, his extensive scholarly knowledge seemed to offer startlingly little practical guidance or relief. He could explain the very nature of suffering in elaborate, precise detail, yet he continued to suffer. He could perfectly describe the path to enlightenment, but he felt personally miles away from reaching that state. One frosty winter morning, an old woman suddenly appeared at Hayato's door. She was heavily bent with age, clad in plain peasant garments, and carried nothing but a small, humble bundle of vegetables. She looked exactly like any ordinary village farmer, certainly not someone who would have anything worthwhile to offer or teach a great, established scholar. "Excuse me, sir," she requested in a soft, deferential voice. "I have been walking throughout the night across the snow, and I am desperately cold and tired. Might I humbly ask to sit by your fire for a short while to warm myself?" Hayato felt a surge of professional annoyance at the intrusion into his concentration, but his decades of Buddhist training had successfully ingrained in him the crucial importance of compassion. He reluctantly permitted the old woman to enter and take a seat near his small, crackling hearth. As she warmed herself, the old woman observed the sheer quantity of books covering every available surface in the room. "My goodness," she exclaimed with a show of amazement. "You must be extraordinarily wise to have successfully read so many volumes about Buddhism." Hayato's chest immediately swelled with a familiar surge of scholarly pride. "Yes," he stated confidently. "I have devoted myself to the study of Buddhist philosophy for more than 30 years. I am intimately familiar with the teachings of all the great masters. There is likely no question concerning Buddhist doctrine that I would be unable to answer." The old woman looked suitably impressed. "How wonderful that is," she murmured. "I am just a simple farmer, but there is one thing I have always deeply pondered. Perhaps you, sir, could finally help me understand it." "Of course," Hayato replied quickly, thoroughly pleased to have an ideal opportunity to demonstrate the breadth of his knowledge to someone who would surely be astonished by his wisdom. The woman remained silent for a moment, simply staring into the flickering fire. Then she posed her question. "What, truly, is the Buddha?" Hayato immediately launched into an elaborate, comprehensive explanation. He lectured on the historical figure of Siddhartha Gautama, discussed the concept of inherent Buddha nature, and meticulously detailed the various philosophical systems defining the different bodies of the Buddha. He quoted extensively from ancient canonical texts and cited dozens of famous masters. He spoke for nearly an hour, methodically covering every single aspect of Buddhahood that his decades of scholarly training had equipped him to discuss. When he finally concluded, Hayato looked at the old woman expectantly, anticipating her gasps of amazement at his profound learning. But she merely looked confused. "I am terribly sorry," she said apologetically, "but I still truly do not understand. You have provided me with a great many facts about the Buddha, but you have not yet told me what the Buddha is." Hayato felt a sharp, internal flash of irritation. "I just finished explaining it in painstaking detail," he retorted. "Perhaps you were not listening carefully enough. Buddha is the awakened one, the person who achieved complete enlightenment, the great teacher who demonstrated the path to liberation from suffering." "Yes, yes," the old woman interrupted gently. "But I ask again, what is the Buddha? Not what the Buddha did or what the Buddha taught, but the fundamental essence of what the Buddha is." Hayato attempted to answer once more, this time employing different terminology and approaching the subject from various obscure philosophical angles. But regardless of his complex attempts, the woman relentlessly returned to the exact same, deceptively simple question. "But what is the Buddha?" After 2 exhausting hours of offering increasingly frustrated and agitated explanations, Hayato finally lost his composure completely. "Look, old woman," he snapped, his voice tight with impatience. "If you are incapable of grasping such fundamentally basic Buddhist concepts, perhaps you should simply stick to your farming and leave philosophy to those who possess the mental capacity to comprehend it." The elderly woman looked directly at him with eyes that suddenly appeared infinitely wiser and deeper than they had moments before. "My dear scholar," she said softly, her voice now carrying authority, "you have spent 30 years learning about the Buddha, but you have never actually met the Buddha. You can describe the concept perfectly, yet you do not truly know what the Buddha is." She slowly rose to her feet and collected her small bundle. True understanding is never discovered in books or through intellectual explanations. It is found only in direct, immediate experience. You know precisely what the Buddha did and what the Buddha taught, but you do not know what the Buddha is because you have never paused to look deep within yourself to find the inherent Buddha nature that already resides there. As she moved toward the door, she turned back with a gentle smile. "I am just a simple farmer," she responded with a gentle smile. "As you rightly pointed out, I cannot read your complex texts or elaborate upon your philosophies. Yet, when I work the soil in my garden, I feel the presence of the Buddha. When I sit quietly as the sun sets in the evening, I meet the Buddha. When I extend a hand to a neighbor in need or offer food to a hungry animal, the Buddha is undeniably there. I may lack the scholarly knowledge about Buddha, but I possess the direct, living experience of the Buddha." With those final words, the old woman simply disappeared into the swirling snowy morning, leaving Hayato standing alone amidst his thousands of books and the sudden, unsettling feeling that his vast knowledge was hollow. For several days following this encounter, Hayato found it impossible to concentrate on his scholarly pursuits. The woman's deceptively simple question, "What is Buddha?" kept resonating in his mind. He was forced to realize that despite years of intense academic study, he genuinely lacked the ability to answer this fundamental question from a place of direct, personal experience. He had meticulously catalogued everything others had theorized or written about the Buddha, but he himself had never encountered the essence of the Buddha directly. This brief encounter profoundly redirected Hayato's life. While he didn't discard his books entirely, he began consciously balancing his intensive scholarly study with the grounding discipline of simple meditation practice. He started paying careful attention to his daily activities, just as the old woman had implied, seeking the presence of the Buddha in ordinary, lived moments rather than exclusively within complex philosophical treatises. Gradually, Hayato's conceptual understanding transformed, migrating from something merely carried in his head to something deeply experienced in his heart. His vast accumulation of knowledge ripened into genuine wisdom, not through the acquisition of new facts, but because he finally began to live the truths he had always known strictly on an intellectual level. This poignant story effectively illuminates one of the most critical distinctions within Buddhist philosophy: the profound difference between intellectual knowledge, knowing about, and experiential wisdom, knowing. It is entirely possible to dedicate years to studying spiritual teachings, becoming an expert in explaining their nuances. However, this purely academic kind of knowledge too often remains theoretical, detached from the reality of our actual lived experience. Hayato's sobering encounter with the simple woman dramatically reveals that genuine understanding cannot be located in books alone. Regardless of how vast our library is, or how proficiently we analyze the texts. True wisdom only emerges when we cease the continuous effort of collecting external information about the truth, and instead begin actively experiencing that truth directly through our moment-to-moment awareness and engaged daily life. The old woman in this narrative beautifully embodies the simple, direct, and embodied wisdom toward which all profound Buddhist teachings ultimately point. She may have been incapable of delivering scholarly lectures on the concept of Buddha nature, yet she knew this fundamental reality intimately through her own lived experience. Her understanding was dynamic, living, and immediately present, rather than being abstract and purely theoretical. This teaching holds particular significance in our modern era, an age characterized by access to more spiritual information than perhaps any previous generation. We possess the capacity to read thousands of books, consume countless videos, and attend endless workshops discussing enlightenment and inner peace. However, this mere accumulation of intellectual knowledge will not deliver the profound peace promised by these teachings unless we commit to experiencing what we are studying. The Buddhist path is fundamentally not about becoming academically smarter regarding spirituality. It is rather about becoming more profoundly awake to the reality and truth that are already present in every moment. When we attempt to conceptualize and analyze our way to peace solely through intellectual thought, we often inadvertently move further away from the immediate, direct experience that would genuinely bring us peace. Take a gentle, conscious breath now and simply notice the distinct difference between merely thinking about the process of breathing and actually experiencing the physical sensation of the breath. This simple distinction perfectly summarizes the essential wisdom the old woman was striving to share. Truth, ultimately, is not something we solve or figure out solely with our conceptual minds, but something we encounter and know with the entirety of our being. Let us explore this critical teaching further through a separate story, one that demonstrates how profound wisdom often arises not from possessing all the definitive answers, but from having the courage to ask the right, essential questions. There was once a thriving monastery whose residents were widely known for their intense, rigorous debates concerning Buddhist philosophy. Every evening, after the day's manual labor was complete, the monks would gather in the main hall and engage in elaborate, passionate discussions about the ultimate nature of reality, the deeper meaning of the core teachings, and the correct interpretation of ancient texts. A young monk named Goro was particularly enamored with these intellectual sparring matches. He was notably quick-witted, extremely well-read, and took immense pride in his ability to master the arguments and definitively prove other monks incorrect. He would dedicate his days to preparing clever, sophisticated points and studying the most obscure and difficult texts, purely so he could impress everyone with the depth of his knowledge during the evening discussions. One day, a new monk arrived at the monastery. His name was Tekken, and he immediately seemed fundamentally different from the rest. He was an older man, perhaps in his 60s, with hands visibly weathered and calloused, and possessing a quiet, unassuming manner that suggested years spent in manual labor rather than cloistered scholarly study. During the evening debates, he always sat silently in the back, listening attentively, but never once offering a contribution. This conspicuous silence greatly puzzled Goro. How, Goro wondered, could anyone sit through such fascinating and vital discussions without the slightest desire to contribute? After a full week of observing Tekken's absolute silence, Goro resolved to strategically draw the newcomer into the conversation. During a particularly heated exchange concerning the nature of emptiness, Goro turned to Tekken and addressed him directly. "Brother Tekken, you have been listening intently to our discussions all week without offering a single word. Surely you must have some considered opinion about whether phenomena are empty of inherent existence." All eyes in the hall swiveled toward Tekken, who looked noticeably uncomfortable at being abruptly put on the spot. He remained quiet for a long, deliberate moment before finally responding, "I apologize, but I don't truly understand the concept you refer to as inherent existence. Could you perhaps take the time to explain it to me?" Goro was immediately delighted. This was the perfect opportunity for Goro to display the superiority of his scholarly knowledge to someone clearly less educated than himself. He immediately launched into an exhaustive, detailed explanation of emptiness philosophy, utilizing highly technical terms and liberally citing ancient masters. When Goro finally finished, Tekken nodded slowly and replied, "Thank you for that elaborate explanation, but I'm afraid I'm still not entirely clear. Could you possibly provide me with a concrete example of something that possesses inherent existence and something that does not?" Goro was more than happy to oblige this request for further demonstration. He spent another 20 minutes meticulously providing various examples and further elaborating on the subtleties of his philosophical understanding. Yet, when he concluded, Tekken posed another deceptively simple question that indicated he still hadn't fully grasped the core concept. This very pattern continued for several successive evenings. Tekken would politely ask seemingly innocent questions that appeared to expose his utter lack of sophisticated understanding, while Goro would respond with increasingly complex and elaborate explanations. The other monks quickly began to view Tekken as rather simple-minded, incapable of grasping the intricate ideas they so skillfully debated. However, a subtle and unexpected transformation began to take hold. As Goro strove repeatedly to clarify these abstruse concepts for someone who appeared utterly devoid of philosophical background, he found himself compelled to scrutinize the foundations of his own understanding far more rigorously. Tekken's relentless, simple questions inadvertently forced Goro to genuinely consider what he actually meant by the technical jargon and terminology he had previously used with such unwavering confidence. One evening, Tekken posed a question that completely halted Goro in the middle of his lecture. "Brother Goro," he began, "you have explained the concept of emptiness to me numerous times now, and I am genuinely grateful for your patience. But I have one wonder. When you are not engaged in explaining emptiness, when you are simply living your daily life, how exactly does this deep understanding alter the way you experience washing the dishes or sweeping the monastery floors?" Goro opened his mouth, ready with a quick reply, but no words emerged. In that moment, he recognized the painful truth. Despite the dazzling sophistication of his explanations, his intellectual grasp of emptiness had never once fundamentally altered how he experienced his most ordinary, everyday activities. It had remained a lofty intellectual concept, entirely separate from his actual, lived experience. "I'm not sure," Goro finally admitted, feeling a flush of genuine embarrassment for the first time in years. Tekken smiled gently in response. "Thank you for your honesty. You see, I spent 40 years working as a farmer before I arrived here. I never acquired the proper names for Buddhist concepts, and I certainly cannot engage in philosophical debates. But when I plant seeds in the empty soil, I encounter an experience that may be precisely what you call emptiness. When I watch the crops thrive through their interdependence with the sun, the rain, and the earth, I witness what you might label dependent origination." He paused meaningfully, casting his gaze around the gathered monks. "I initially came here hoping to learn the sophisticated names for the truths I had already experienced through decades of daily work. But I am beginning to suspect that perhaps the names themselves are not the most important thing. Maybe the living experience is what truly counts." The entire room was enveloped in a profound silence. For the first time, many of the monks genuinely questioned whether their sophisticated, intense debates were actually propelling them toward greater wisdom or merely distancing them from it. "Please don't misunderstand me," Tekken carefully continued, ensuring his point was clear. "I am not suggesting that study is worthless. I am deeply grateful for all the explanations you have all patiently given me. But I simply wonder if sometimes we become so intensely interested in talking about the truth that we neglect the far greater task of living it." From that very night onward, the essential character of the monastery's evening gatherings began to transform. Instead of striving to win arguments centered on abstract concepts, the monks started sharing honest reflections on how their philosophical understanding genuinely impacted their daily experience. Rather than competing to show off the breadth of their knowledge, they began asking genuine, heartfelt questions about how to cultivate a life defined by greater wisdom and compassion. Goro personally discovered that Tekken's simple, persistent questions had been infinitely more valuable to his spiritual growth than all his years of clever, aggressive arguments. By compelling him to rigorously examine the practical, lived meaning of his knowledge, the older, quiet monk had initiated the vital process of transforming Goro's intellectual understanding into authentic, lived wisdom. This entire narrative reveals another crucial, foundational aspect of Buddhist wisdom. True understanding is ultimately measured not by the sheer volume of knowledge we possess or our capacity to eloquently explain complex concepts, but by how fundamentally that knowledge has transformed the quality of our actual lives. Tekken's unique approach to learning inverted the typical scholarly expectation. Instead of frantically attempting to accumulate more information, his focus was on forging a deep, tangible connection between the information and his direct experience. Instead of striving to impress others with academic prowess, he maintained a genuine, focused curiosity about how this philosophical understanding could practically improve his daily existence. The simple, pointed questions Tekken posed proved far more valuable than all of Goro's elaborate explanations because they systematically exposed the vast chasm between merely knowing about something and knowing that thing directly and experientially. We might meticulously memorize every teaching and precept regarding compassion, but until we fundamentally become more compassionate in the tenor of our daily interactions, our knowledge remains tragically incomplete. This teaching provides a profound sense of relief because it clarifies that we do not need to become academic scholars or philosophical experts to genuinely benefit from Buddhist wisdom. We are not required to master every philosophical nuance or commit complex ancient texts to memory. We simply need to take whatever measure of understanding we currently possess, no matter how basic it might seem, and immediately begin applying it to the reality of our actual moment-to-moment experience. The deep, abiding peace that these teachings offer arises not from intellectual mastery or academic achievement, but from the gradual, sustained transformation of how we choose to meet life in each passing moment. When we halt the endless effort of trying to collect more spiritual knowledge and instead shift our focus to actively living spiritual principles, we quickly discover that even the most simple, basic understanding can bring about profound, revolutionary changes to our experience. As you rest your attention now within the context of this teaching, take a moment to notice how liberating it feels to consciously let go of any internal pressure to understand everything perfectly. The Buddhist path is fundamentally not a race toward becoming an expert in Buddhist philosophy. It is a commitment to becoming increasingly awake, more compassionate, and more peaceful within whatever specific circumstances we find ourselves. The type of wisdom that facilitates true, lasting transformation is often startlingly simple. Consider the old woman, who knew the Buddha through the humble act of her daily work, or Tekken, who understood emptiness through the routine effort of farming. We possess the potential to find the deepest spiritual teachings reflected within our most ordinary, mundane activities, provided we bring genuine attention and mindful care to them. This level of embodied understanding naturally leads to the kind of profound peace that allows both the body and the mind to finally rest completely. When we cease struggling to logically figure everything out solely with our conceptual minds and instead start experiencing life directly with the totality of our whole being, we uncover the sanctuary of presence toward which these ancient teachings have consistently been pointing. A fisherman named Ichiro lived in a small, traditional coastal village, where his family had fished the exact same waters for generations. He possessed a beautiful boat, meticulously built by his grandfather's own hands, featuring intricate carved wooden details and a perfectly tailored sail that expertly caught the wind. This vessel was more than just his livelihood. It was the embodiment of his pride and joy. He dedicated countless hours each week to polishing the wood and mending the nets, ensuring everything remained in impeccable condition. Ichiro gained renown throughout the village as the most successful fisherman. His nets consistently seemed to locate the richest schools of fish, and his intuitive knowledge of the ocean's subtle moods and shifting patterns remained unmatched. Other fishermen would watch him launch his vessel every morning, hoping to glean his secret techniques. Tragically, Ichiro had developed such a powerful attachment to his boat and his established reputation for success that the simple act of fishing was no longer enjoyable. He woke up every morning consumed by worry about the weather, anxiety over whether the fish would be running well, and a paralyzing fear that some accident might befall his precious boat. He spent the night before every fishing expedition obsessively checking and rechecking his equipment, often unable to sleep due to the stress of planning and worrying. This deep-seated attachment to the outcome, catching fish, made Ichiro perpetually tense and highly calculating. He would become immensely frustrated when fellow fishermen reported good luck in spots where he had caught nothing. He would abruptly cut his trips short if the fishing seemed slow, or, conversely, push himself dangerously close to exhaustion when the fish were biting heavily, terrified of missing even a single opportunity. Then, one fateful morning, Ichiro discovered that his magnificent boat had been stolen overnight. Someone had cleanly cut the moorings and silently sailed the vessel out to sea while the rest of the village slept. Ichiro stood on the dock, gazing blankly at the vacant space where his boat should have rested, feeling profoundly as though his entire sense of identity had been stolen along with it. The other fishermen expressed their genuine sympathy and offered assistance, but the majority of their boats were scarcely large enough to support one person, much less two. Only the elder Saburo, whose tiny, rickety fishing boat appeared to be held together purely by frayed patches and necessity, offered to take Ichiro out. Ichiro had always maintained a subtle disdain for Saburo's poor equipment and reliably modest catches. The old man's boat perpetually looked as though it might sink at any moment, and his nets were so aged and meticulously mended that they seemed composed more of patched material than original weaving. Nevertheless, having exhausted all other options, Ichiro reluctantly accepted the generous offer. As they paddled laboriously out in Saburo's leaky little vessel, Ichiro was consumed by a mix of embarrassment and intense anxiety. How could he possibly hope to catch anything using such desperately inadequate equipment? Worse, what if the other fishermen spotted him in this pathetic, humbling craft? His carefully constructed reputation as the most successful fisherman would surely be instantly ruined. But once they reached the familiar fishing grounds, something entirely unexpected occurred. Free from the burden of worrying about his perfect boat and his meticulously maintained, sophisticated equipment, Ichiro suddenly found himself paying attention to subtle details he had never registered before. He closely observed the unique way Saburo read the water, not through complex, sophisticated navigational knowledge, but through simple, profound, and quiet observation. The old man would often sit perfectly still for extended minutes, merely listening to the natural rhythm of the waves and feeling the gentle movement of the current beneath the hull. When he cast his heavily patched nets, he did so completely devoid of any sense of urgency or any obvious attachment to the final outcome. If the nets were retrieved empty, he would simply, calmly move on to try another spot. If they came up full, he would offer a quiet smile and immediately return to the work at hand. "Saburo," Ichiro inquired tentatively, "aren't you worried that your nets might tear apart? They genuinely look like they could completely fall to pieces at any moment." The old man gave a soft chuckle. "They might, indeed. They have torn many times over the years, and each time I have mended them. If they tear today, I will mend them tonight. If they fall apart completely, I will simply make new ones. The fish, after all, do not care how attractive the nets are." As the long day progressed, Ichiro noticed that he was relaxing in a manner he had not experienced in years. Liberated from the constant need to maintain and protect his own precious equipment, he was able to focus entirely and deeply on the inherent experience of fishing itself. He started recalling the simple joy he had felt being on the water as a child, long before fishing transformed into a struggle for success and reputation. To his utter amazement, they caught more fish that day than he had managed in weeks using his expensive, sophisticated boat and equipment. Crucially, however, he enjoyed the entire experience with a profound lightness he had almost forgotten was possible. "How is this possible?" he asked Saburo, genuinely mystified. "Your equipment is so old and simple, yet we are experiencing such tremendous success." Saburo smiled serenely as he hauled in another net heavy with fish. "Perhaps it is because I carry no fear of losing anything. My boat is already visibly falling apart, so I have no cause to worry about scratching it. My nets are already heavily patched, so I hold no fear of them tearing again. When you are not constantly dedicating energy to protecting something, you are completely free to focus entirely on the activity itself. That evening, as they finally returned to the shore, Ichiro experienced a powerful realization. The temporary loss of his prized boat had unexpectedly freed him from something he had not even recognized was holding him captive. His suffocating attachment to his perfect equipment had actually served as an obstacle, preventing him from fishing with the natural ease and relaxed attention that were the true sources of success. Over the subsequent weeks, while he awaited news of his stolen vessel, Ichiro faithfully continued fishing alongside Saburo. Every day brought fresh, illuminating discoveries about how his rigid attachment to owning the best, most advanced equipment had ironically diminished his effectiveness as a fisherman. His pervasive worry about protecting his possessions had fundamentally prevented him from being fully, mindfully present for the actual work. When his magnificent boat was eventually located and returned to him, Ichiro faced a critical and interesting choice. He could regress to his old methodology of fishing, complete with its accompanying anxiety and attachment. Or, he could proceed with the sense of profound freedom he had discovered through Saburo's simple, detached approach. He chose to keep his boat, but resolved to fish with a drastically different attitude. He continued to maintain his equipment with diligence and care, but he was no longer enslaved by the paralyzing fear of losing it. He still worked hard to maximize his catch, but he absolutely refused to allow his temporary success or failure to dictate his inner peace of mind. He had grasped the vital distinction between genuinely caring for something and being utterly enslaved by that very thing. Years later, when younger fishermen would approach Ichiro seeking counsel, he would offer this wisdom: take excellent care of your equipment, but never allow your equipment to take care of you. Love your work deeply, but ensure that your work does not become your master. The most successful fishing happens when you are not paralyzed by the fear of coming home empty-handed. This powerful story illuminates one of Buddhism's most profoundly liberating insights concerning the true nature of attachment. We frequently confuse loving something with the need to grasp it tightly, but authentic love inherently allows for freedom and detachment. Ichiro realized that his possessive attachment to his beautiful boat and his professional success was ironically the precise thing preventing him from enjoying the very activities he believed he was safeguarding. The Buddhist principle of non-attachment is often mistakenly interpreted as emotional indifference or a general lack of caring. Yet, Saburo's tranquil example clearly demonstrates its true meaning. He cared intensely about the act of fishing, yet he remained fundamentally unenslaved by his faulty equipment or obsessively focused on specific outcomes. This profound internal freedom enabled him to respond naturally, spontaneously, and skillfully to whatever conditions each new day presented. Non-attachment does not necessitate ceasing to have preferences or abandoning the pursuit of goals. Ichiro certainly maintained a preference for catching fish over failing to catch fish, and he continued to diligently care for his boat once it was safely returned. But he learned how to hold these preferences lightly, refusing to let them control his inner peace or distract him from being fully present for the lived experience itself. This teaching radically transforms how we relate to everything we hold dear. Our personal relationships flourish and become more loving when we release the urge to possess and control the people we cherish. Our professional work becomes dramatically more fulfilling when we are no longer enslaved by an anxious need for external recognition or predefined success. Our material possessions bring greater joy when we appreciate them fully without simultaneously living under the crippling fear of losing them. The deep peace inherent in Buddhist teaching stems, in part, from this profound liberation. A liberation from the anxiety that accompanies constant protection and control. When we learn to engage fully with the richness of life without forming rigid attachments to specific outcomes, we discover an unshakable inner freedom that absolutely no external circumstance can ever diminish or take away. Breathe gently now and truly feel how this understanding instantaneously creates a spaciousness in your heart. Notice how the mere thought of holding your cherished preferences more lightly immediately generates a palpable sense of relief, like setting down a heavy, unseen burden you hadn't realized you were carrying. Let us explore this liberating wisdom further through yet another story, one that demonstrates how the deepest non-attachment can radically transform even our relationship with our own fixed identity and hard-earned achievements. Master Ryanan was broadly regarded as one of the most remarkably beautiful and accomplished women of her entire generation. Born into a high-ranking noble family, she was afforded the finest education available and achieved mastery in disciplines ranging from poetry and calligraphy to music and dance. Her exceptional beauty was legendary throughout the region, and scores of wealthy, influential men sought her hand in marriage. However, Ryanan felt an undeniable, strong calling toward a dedicated spiritual life. Despite her family's fierce objections and society's weighty expectations, she made the determined decision to become a Buddhist nun. She approached several renowned monasteries, but consistently, none would accept her. The various abbots would simply take one look at her exceptional beauty and immediately refuse her entry. Your stunning appearance would prove far too distracting for the resident monks, they invariably told her. You should marry and live a conventional life. The rigorous monastic path is simply not suitable for someone like you. Ryanan remained fully determined to pursue her spiritual calling, yet her physical beauty had become a seemingly insurmountable obstacle. She began to grasp that her own subtle attachment to her appearance, combined with society's profound attachment to it, was precisely what prevented her from realizing the life she truly sought. Following rejection by the 7th monastery, Ryanan made a drastic, radical decision. She returned home and proceeded directly to the kitchen, where she heated a large iron pot until it glowed red-hot. Then, without a moment's hesitation, she pressed the searing metal firmly against her face, scarring herself severely and permanently. The ensuing physical pain was excruciating, but the emotional liberation was instantaneous. She had forcibly freed herself from the immense burden of exceptional beauty that had previously defined her entire existence. She was no longer the famously beautiful Ryanan, but simply Ryanan, a focused woman genuinely seeking spiritual understanding. When she presented herself at the 8th monastery with her scarred face, the abbot accepted her without question. Her willingness to intentionally sacrifice her most prized, defining possession, her remarkable beauty, eloquently demonstrated the immense depth of her commitment to rigorous spiritual practice. In the decades that followed, Ryanan gained renown not for her former appearance, but exclusively for her profound wisdom and boundless compassion. She composed poetry that elegantly captured the deepest spiritual insights, and her teachings guided countless students along the path to liberation. One of her most famous poems, penned many years after her self-scarring, reads, "To serve the Buddha, I burned my face with fire. The searing flames that scarred my features long ago are merely faint echoes compared to the burning devotion of my soul. Both fires ultimately guide me toward the same destination of peace." Students occasionally inquired if Ryanan ever regretted destroying her beauty. She would merely smile and reply, "I destroyed nothing at all. I only liberated myself from the confining prison of others' expectations and the grip of my own former attachment. The true beauty that always mattered resided on the inside." Yet, the most profound teaching embedded within Ryanan's story emerged near the very end of her life. A young nun once approached her and confessed, "Master, I deeply admire your sacrifice, but I simply cannot imagine ever being brave enough to destroy my appearance as you did. How did you summon such incredible courage?" Ryanin looked upon her student with eyes full of gentle wisdom. "I did not destroy my appearance out of courage," she explained. "I destroyed it out of attachment. I was so intensely focused on becoming a nun that I was willing to sacrifice absolutely anything to achieve that identity." The young nun looked genuinely confused. "But isn't deep dedication to spiritual practice always considered a good thing?" Ryanin replied, "Dedication, yes, is essential but not attachment. When I burned my face, I believed I was demonstrating my ultimate commitment to the Buddha. In reality, I was only showcasing my attachment to a specific self-image, that of being a nun. I merely swapped one form of clinging for another." She paused, gazing thoughtfully at the monastery garden where the flowers bloomed and faded in perfect accordance with their natural cycles. "True freedom," she continued, "comes not from attempting to change our external circumstances, but from completely releasing our grip on all identities we hold dear, even the most sacred spiritual ones. The Buddha I desperately sought by becoming a nun was the very same Buddha who had been present when I was a beautiful woman living in my father's house. I simply couldn't recognize it then because I was utterly attached to my own appearance." "So, was your sacrifice meaningless?" the student asked hesitantly. Ryanin smiled warmly. "No, it was necessary for me at that time. Sometimes we must go to these extremes to truly comprehend what moderation means. My scarred face taught me a fundamental lesson that no amount of dedicated studying could ever have revealed. It showed me that genuine freedom arises not from changing how we look or what role we play in the world, but from fundamentally changing how tightly we cling to these things." This profound narrative reveals multiple, interconnected layers of Buddhist teaching regarding attachment and the nature of identity. Ryanin's initial attachment to her beauty prevented her from pursuing the spiritual life she felt called to. Conversely, her later intense attachment to becoming a nun led her to an extreme action which, while successful in achieving her immediate goal, was itself another deep form of clinging. The deepest wisdom she shared came from her mature, realized understanding that true freedom doesn't demand that we destroy or dramatically alter our circumstances. It simply requires us to change our internal relationship to those circumstances. We can be beautiful or scarred, wealthy or poor, highly accomplished or completely ordinary, and still find the same absolute liberation by releasing our attachment to these passing conditions. This teaching is especially relevant in our contemporary culture, which relentlessly encourages us to define and validate ourselves by our appearance, our achievements, our possessions, or the roles we occupy. We instinctively believe we are our job title, our relationship status, our physical attributes, or our social position. But Buddhist wisdom teaches us definitively that these superficial identities, while often practically useful, are not our true, fundamental nature. The deep peace that arises from this understanding is immense, precisely because it means our intrinsic well-being does not depend on successfully maintaining any particular external conditions. We do not have to perpetually remain young, successful, healthy, or admired to be fundamentally okay and whole. Our deepest, unshakable security comes from recognizing that unchanging core which remains regardless of our constantly shifting circumstances. Ryanin's final insight points directly toward the ultimate teaching of non-attachment. Even our most dedicated spiritual practices and achievements can inadvertently become new forms of bondage if we cling to them too tightly. The ultimate goal is not to become a perfect meditator or an idealized enlightened being, but simply to recognize the freedom that is always already present, irrespective of our spiritual accomplishments. This realization doesn't imply that we abandon effort or stop caring about our growth and development. It means we hold our spiritual journey lightly, engaging wholeheartedly while remaining entirely unattached to specific, desired outcomes. Like Ichiro, learning to fish without fear of failure, we can practice profoundly without being enslaved by our internal need for spiritual success. As you rest in this teaching now, feel into the profound possibility of releasing your grip on whatever identities you have been holding most tightly, whether it is the need to be successful, the need to be liked, the need to always be right, or even the need to be spiritual. Notice what it might genuinely feel like to hold these crucial aspects of yourself much more lightly. This is the radical freedom that Buddhist teachings ultimately point toward. Not the freedom from having preferences or responsibilities, but the freedom from being utterly controlled by our preferences and responsibilities. Not the freedom from caring deeply about life, but the freedom to care without suffering when things inevitably do not go according to our plans. In this spacious realm of non-attachment, we find the deep peace that allows us to engage fully with life while remaining unshakably calm at our center. This is the sanctuary that these ancient teachings offer, a place of rest that no external change can disturb because its existence does not depend on anything external at all. In the mountains situated above a small village lived a woodcutter named Dai, who had spent his entire life dedicated to cutting and selling firewood. Every morning he would diligently climb the steep forest paths, select the appropriate trees, and spend the day cutting and splitting the timber. Every evening he would return home tired, yet deeply satisfied with his simple, honest work. Dai had always sincerely thought of himself as just a woodcutter, nothing more or less. He was not educated like the village scholars, nor wealthy like the merchants, nor artistically gifted like the craftsmen. When people inquired about his occupation, he would simply state, "I cut wood. That's all I know how to do." One day, while working deep within the forest, Dai heard strange, worried sounds emanating from a nearby grove. Following the sounds, he discovered a group of monks who had become thoroughly lost while journeying between monasteries. They were sitting anxiously by a small stream, looking worried and utterly confused. Their leader, an elderly abbot, approached Dai respectfully. "Excuse me, friend," the abbot began. "We have been walking for 2 days and simply cannot find our way back to the main path. Do you, by chance, know these mountains well?" Dai nodded reassuringly. "I've been walking these paths for 40 years, he affirmed. "I know every tree and every stream in these mountains." The abbot's face immediately brightened with visible relief. "Could you possibly guide us back to the road that leads to Zen Temple? We would be immensely grateful for your help." Dai agreed immediately, even though it meant abandoning his work for the day. He led the group of 15 monks through paths that seemed completely unmarked and invisible to them but were as intimately familiar to him as the rooms of his own house. As they walked, the monks were astonished by Dai's intimate knowledge of the forest terrain. "How do you possibly know that this specific path leads to the main road?" one monk asked as Dai expertly guided them through what appeared to be dense, pathless woods. "I can tell by the way the moss grows on the trees," Dai explained simply. "The moss is always thicker on the north side, and I know the road runs generally east-west through this valley. Also, I can faintly hear the sound of the river that runs directly beside the road." The monks listened carefully, realizing they could hear nothing distinct but the usual forest sounds. But as they continued faithfully following Dai, they did indeed soon come to a river and, shortly thereafter, the main road. As they proceeded, Dai continued to share his profound knowledge naturally and without pretense. He pointed out which specific plants could be safely eaten, which ones could heal minor injuries, where the freshest water could be found, and how to accurately read weather signs in the sky and wind. "You know so much about living in perfect harmony with nature," one young monk commented with obvious admiration. "Have you studied these things in books?" Dai laughed heartily. "I can't read books," he admitted. "I just pay close attention to what the forest teaches me every single day. When you spend enough time dedicated to the trees and streams, they tell you exactly what you need to know." When they reached the road that would lead the monks safely to their destination, the abbot took Dai's hands in deep gratitude. "My friend, you have saved us from a very difficult and potentially dangerous situation. How can we possibly repay your kindness?" "No payment is needed," Dai said simply. "I was genuinely glad to help." But the abbot was not finished with his lesson. "You claim you are just a woodcutter, but today you have been a revered teacher to us. You have shown us a wisdom about reading nature that none of our scholarly books contain. You have demonstrated profound compassion by helping strangers without expecting anything in return. You have shared your deep knowledge freely and guided us with perfect patience." The old monk looked directly into Dai's eyes. "Tell me, what truly makes someone a teacher? Is it having read many books? Or is it having learned deeply from life itself and sharing that learning with others who genuinely need it?" Dai was quiet for a long moment, carefully considering this unexpected question. I suppose it's about sharing what you know to help others," he finally replied. "And what makes someone truly wise?" The abbot continued gently. "Is it knowing complicated, abstract theories? Or is it understanding how to live well and peacefully?" Again, Dai thought carefully. "Maybe wisdom is knowing how to work with life instead of constantly fighting against it." The abbot smiled widely. "Then you are both a teacher and a wise man, whether you choose to call yourself these things or not. You have taught us more in one afternoon than we learned in many days of formal study." As the monks continued on their journey, Dai walked slowly back into the forest, deeply considering everything the abbot had said. For 40 years, he had rigidly seen himself as just a woodcutter, but the monks had recognized him as a teacher and a skillful guide. Which view was truly correct? That night, as he sat by his small fire eating his simple dinner, Dai reflected on his conversation with the traveling monks. He realized, with startling clarity, that he had been limiting his own potential with a narrow, self-imposed definition of who he was. He had erroneously thought that being a woodcutter was somehow less valuable than being a scholar or a monk. But the abbot had helped him see that his deep, practical knowledge and natural compassion were, in themselves, powerful forms of wisdom. Over the following weeks, Dai began to notice things about himself that he had never recognized before. When neighbors approached him for advice about practical, daily problems, he realized he was indeed teaching. When he helped lost travelers find their way, he was clearly demonstrating compassion. When he worked in perfect harmony with the natural rhythms of the forest, he was practicing a profound form of meditation. Nothing about his physical, daily activities had changed, but his internal understanding of who he was had expanded completely. He was still a woodcutter, certainly, but he was also much more than that. He was a teacher, a respected guide, a wise man, and a crucial source of help for his community. Years later, when people would inquire of Dai about the fundamental nature of identity, he would often say, "I used to think I was just a woodcutter. Then I learned I was also a teacher and a wise man. But eventually, I understood that all these labels are merely like clothes I wear. Underneath them, I am simply someone who tries to be helpful and pay deep attention to life. That, it seems, is perfectly enough." This resonant story reveals one of Buddhism's most profound teachings about the nature of self and identity. We too often limit ourselves severely by accepting narrow, constrained definitions of who we are. But these carefully constructed identities are not fixed truths. They are simply the stories we choose to tell ourselves, and we possess the inherent power to recognize the fuller, more expansive truth of our actual being. Dai's internal transformation didn't require him to change his job or acquire new, formal skills. It merely required him to see beyond the limiting label he had placed upon himself. When he stopped defining himself as just a woodcutter, he could finally recognize all the wisdom, compassion, and practical knowledge that he had diligently developed through his simple, devoted work. This teaching is especially important because so many people suffer from the debilitating belief that they are just something ordinary or unimportant. Just a parent, just a worker, just a student. But Buddhist wisdom instructs us that there is no such thing as just anything. Every single role, when approached with careful attention and genuine care, becomes a fertile path for developing profound wisdom and compassion. The truth that Dai ultimately discovered is that our deepest identity is not found in any particular role or grand achievement. It is found in our inherent capacity to pay attention, to sincerely learn from experience, and to help others when we can. These essential qualities can develop within any life circumstance, whether we are woodcutters or scholars, parents or professionals. This understanding brings tremendous, instantaneous freedom, because it means we do not need to change our external circumstances to discover our true, intrinsic value. We don't require special education, impressive career success, or recognized social status to be worthy of respect and self-acceptance. The wisdom and compassion that truly matter most can develop organically through any sincere engagement with life. Take a gentle breath and feel how this teaching creates open space around any limiting ideas you might currently hold about yourself. Notice what it might feel like to see beyond the labels you have accepted and recognize the fuller, richer truth of who you are. Let us now explore this wisdom further through another story that demonstrates how our true nature is often obscured, not by external circumstances, but by our own mistaken ideas about what truly makes someone valuable. There was once a monastery that took in orphan children and raised them as part of the community. One of these children, a boy named Kodo, had been found as an infant with no knowledge of his parentage or background. The monks raised him with love and care, but Kodo always felt deeply different from the others. Unlike the monks who had specifically chosen their spiritual path, Kodo felt like he belonged nowhere in particular. He wasn't officially a monk since he had never taken vows. But he wasn't a regular villager either, since he had been raised entirely within the monastery walls. He helped with daily tasks and participated fully in temple life, but he often felt like he was merely existing without any real purpose or established identity. As Kodo grew into a young man, his sense of not belonging became stronger and more persistent. He would watch the monks during their formal ceremonies and feel like an outsider looking in. He would see village families during festivals and feel envious of their clear, strong family bonds. He began to think of himself as nobody special, just someone who had happened to end up at the monastery by pure accident. One day, a famous master from the capital city came to visit their temple. Master Sojin was known throughout the region for his profound wisdom and his uncanny ability to see the true nature of anyone he met. The local monks were excited to receive such an honored guest, and they meticulously prepared their finest ceremonies and presentations to impress him. During Master Sojin's stay, each monk was invited to meet with him privately to receive personal guidance. Kodo naturally assumed he wouldn't be included in these sacred meetings, since he wasn't officially a monk, but to his great surprise, he was called to see the master just like everyone else. Kodo approached the meeting nervously, utterly unsure what he should say to such an important teacher. He entered the simple room where Master Sojin was sitting and bowed respectfully. "Please sit," the master said kindly. "Tell me about yourself." "There isn't much to tell, master," Kodo said humbly. "I'm not really anybody special. I was left here as a baby and the monks have been kind enough to let me stay. I help with the daily work, but I don't have any particular skills or purpose. I'm just here." Master Sojin listened carefully to this self-description, studying Kodo's face with gentle, focused attention. When Kodo finished, the master asked, "Who told you that you are nobody special?" Kodo was completely surprised by the question. "Well, nobody told me directly. I just know it's true. I don't have parents or a family name. I haven't taken vows or achieved anything important. I'm just an orphan who lives at a monastery. I see, Master Sojin said quietly. And who told you that having parents makes someone special? Who decided that taking vows or achieving notable things determines a person's intrinsic value? Kodo had never thought about these fundamental questions before. I suppose I just assumed these things mattered. Master Sojin smiled gently. Let me tell you what I see when I look at you. I see someone who has been shaped by daily spiritual practice since infancy. I see someone who has learned to live simply and to help others without ever expecting recognition. I see someone who has grown up surrounded by wisdom and compassion and has absorbed these qualities naturally, like breathing. The master leaned forward slightly. Most people come to spiritual practice later in life, after their minds have been filled with worldly desires and confused ideas. You have been practicing from the very beginning. Even if you didn't consciously know that's what you were doing, your ordinary daily life has been a powerful form of meditation. Kodo felt utterly confused. But I've never achieved enlightenment or had profound realizations like the stories about great masters. And how do you know that? Master Sojin asked. What do you think enlightenment looks like? Do you think it must come with dramatic visions or supernatural powers? I thought it would feel different somehow. I thought enlightened people would feel special or different from ordinary people. Master Sojin laughed softly. My friend, you have been looking for enlightenment as if it were something extraordinary that would make you feel important and special. But what if enlightenment is simply the complete acceptance of being ordinary? What if wisdom is found not in feeling special, but in recognizing that everyone is already complete exactly as they are? He gestured toward the window where they could see other monks going about their daily tasks. Look at your brothers out there. They are sweeping, cooking, gardening. Are they any less wise when they're doing these simple tasks than when they're sitting in formal meditation? Is their Buddha nature only present during formal practice? Kodo watched the familiar scene of daily monastery life with completely new eyes. He began to truly understand what the master was pointing toward. The Buddha nature you've been seeking, Master Sojin continued, is not hidden somewhere deep inside you, waiting to be discovered through special achievements. It's what's been looking through your eyes your whole life. It's what's been present during every moment of kindness, every act of service, every instant of simple attention to your daily tasks. Master Sojin stood up and placed a gentle hand on Kodo's shoulder. You came here telling me you are nobody special. And in a way, you're absolutely right. You are not special in the way the ego wants to be special. Not important in the way the mind wants to be important. But this very ordinariness you're disappointed by is actually your greatest gift. You have lived your whole life without the burden of trying to become someone special. And because of that, you have remained naturally who you really are. That evening, as Kodo went about his usual tasks of helping with dinner and evening cleanup, everything felt simultaneously exactly the same and completely different. He was still doing the same work, still living the same simple life, but he was no longer anxiously waiting for something better or more dramatic to happen. He was no longer looking for a different identity or a special achievement to make him feel inherently valuable. He realized that the seeking itself had been the only thing preventing him from recognizing what was already fully present. His true nature had been there all along. Not hidden, but so obvious that he had completely overlooked it while searching for something far more dramatic. This profound story illuminates the deepest teaching about our true nature in Buddhist wisdom. We often think we need to become someone special, achieve something monumental, or have dramatic spiritual experiences to be worthy or complete. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Our true nature is already present, not as something extraordinary, but as the ordinary, effortless awareness that experiences our daily life. Kodo's journey shows us how our seeking for a special identity can actually prevent us from recognizing the natural completeness that's already here. When we stop trying to become someone important and instead fully appreciate who we already are, we discover that we were never actually lacking anything essential. This teaching brings immense relief because it means we don't need to wait for some future achievement or realization to be fundamentally okay. We don't need to earn our worth through accomplishments or spiritual attainments. The awareness that's reading these words right now, the consciousness that experiences your thoughts and feelings, is already complete and perfect just as it is. The Buddhist path is not about becoming enlightened, but about recognizing the enlightenment that's already present. Not about achieving a special state, but about seeing through the powerful illusion that we need a special state to be complete. Like Kodo, we often overlook our natural wholeness while frantically searching for something more impressive. This understanding naturally leads to a deep sense of ease and radical self-acceptance. When we stop trying to be someone other than who we are, when we stop waiting for some future moment when we'll finally be good enough or special enough, we can rest fully in the simple truth of our present experience. As you settle into this teaching now, feel into the possibility that you are already exactly who you're meant to be. Not perfect in the sense of having no room for growth or learning, but complete in the sense that your fundamental nature lacks nothing. The peace that Buddhist teachings offer is not something you need to achieve, but something you can recognize right here, right now, in the simple fact of your own aware presence. This recognition is the greatest gift these ancient teachings offer. Not techniques for becoming better, but the profound wisdom to see that underneath all our ideas about ourselves, we are already whole. This wholeness is what allows us to rest completely, knowing that we are home exactly where we are. There once lived a master gardener named Yuki, who was famous throughout the region for creating the most beautiful gardens anyone had ever seen. Her specialty was cherry trees, and people would travel from distant provinces just to walk through her gardens during the brief, glorious cherry blossom season. Yuki had spent 40 years perfecting her art. She knew exactly which varieties of cherry trees would bloom at different times, strategically creating waves of color that lasted for weeks. She understood precisely how to shape the trees so their blossoms would perfectly frame mountain views. She had painstakingly created stone paths that guided visitors to see each tree from its most beautiful angle. But Yuki had a problem that troubled her deeply. Every year, just as her gardens reached their absolute peak beauty, the cherry blossoms would inevitably begin to fall. Within days, the magnificent display she had worked all year to create would be gone, leaving only dull green leaves where stunning flowers had been. An old woman named Chio lived alone in a humble cottage situated at the edge of her village. She had spent her entire life in that spot, raising her children, caring for her husband until his passing, and supporting her neighbors through countless seasons of happiness and sorrow. Now in her 80s, she lived quietly, accompanied by her memories and the comforting ritual of her simple daily tasks. Every morning, Chio would rise before dawn and take her customary seat on her wooden porch, observing the world as it slowly awakened. She would listen intently to the first birdsong, feel the cool, fresh morning air on her skin, and watch the subtle, magnificent changes in the light as the sun crested the mountains. This dedicated time of quiet morning sitting had become the most cherished part of her daily life. One particular morning, as Chio settled into her usual spot, a young monk appeared on the path leading past her cottage. He was walking quickly, his face clearly etched with signs of worry and profound frustration. He stopped abruptly when he noticed the serene old woman and decided to approach her for guidance. "Honored grandmother," he said, bowing deeply and respectfully, "I am traveling throughout the country to study with different masters, hoping to grasp the deepest teachings of Buddhism. I have been walking for many days and I am still quite far from my intended destination. Can you perhaps tell me if there are any enlightened teachers residing in this area? Chio looked at the earnest young man with gentle, knowing eyes. What kind of teacher are you seeking? She inquired softly. I want to find someone who has truly realized the ultimate truth, the monk replied. Someone who can clearly show me how to achieve complete liberation from suffering. I have diligently studied countless texts and practiced various techniques, yet I still feel miles away from true enlightenment. Surely there must be a master somewhere who can impart the final, crucial teaching I need. The old woman remained quiet for a long moment. Then she offered a soft, gentle smile. Would you like to sit with me for a while? The morning is exceptionally beautiful, and you look weary from your long journey. The monk was initially impatient to resume his travels, but something in the woman's profound and peaceful presence compelled him to pause. He humbly sat down on the porch steps beside her. Tell me, Chio said gently, what exactly do you hope to gain or find when you finally encounter this enlightened teacher? I want to understand the fundamental nature of reality, the monk answered quickly and fervently. I wish to know how to become utterly free from attachment and the cycle of suffering. I long to experience the deep, lasting peace that accompanies true awakening. Chio nodded thoughtfully, observing him. And how precisely will you know when you have found these things? The question clearly surprised the monk. Well, I suppose I will feel profoundly different, more peaceful, certainly wiser. I will simply know that I understand the deepest truths. I see, the old woman responded. She gestured toward the small garden patch in front of her cottage, where vegetables were growing in neat, orderly rows. I planted those vegetables in the spring, diligently tended them throughout the summer, and now, in autumn, I harvest exactly what I need each day. When I eat these simple vegetables, am I experiencing the nature of reality? The monk looked genuinely confused. I suppose in a way, yes, but that's just ordinary, mundane life. I am seeking something far deeper than mere daily activities. Chio smiled kindly and then pointed to a small bird that had landed companionably near their feet. This little bird doesn't appear to be suffering from attachment. It simply takes what it needs and moves on instantly. It certainly doesn't seem to be seeking enlightenment, yet it appears quite free. What do you suppose it knows that you do not? The monk watched the bird as it swiftly pecked at seeds on the ground, then lifted into the air and flew away without a moment's hesitation. But that's just instinct. The bird doesn't possess consciousness or awareness like humans do. Are you certain of that? Chio asked. How can you truly know what the bird experiences? And how do you know that your complex human consciousness is not, perhaps, far more complicated than it actually needs to be? They sat together in a profoundly comfortable silence for several minutes. The monk found himself naturally relaxing as he simply observed the quiet, simple scene unfolding before him. The early morning light filtered softly through the trees. A gentle breeze rustled through the garden, and the distant sounds of the waking village formed a peaceful, unobtrusive backdrop. The monk finally said slowly, sitting here feels more peaceful than I have felt in months of intensive practice and seeking. Chio nodded, waiting. What do you think is different about this moment? The monk considered her question carefully. I'm not trying to achieve anything at all. I'm not analyzing the environment or seeking a deep answer. I'm just here. And how does that feel? Natural. Easy. Like I can finally stop pushing myself so incredibly hard. The old woman stood up slowly and began the process of preparing to tend her garden. I have been sitting on this porch every morning for 40 years, she remarked. I have watched thousands of sunrises, felt thousands of morning breezes, listened to thousands of bird songs. In one sense, each morning is the same, yet each morning is also completely new. She looked back at the young monk, her eyes radiating profound kindness. You asked me about enlightened teachers. I believe the morning is your teacher. The bird is your teacher. Your own breath is your teacher. The feeling of peace you just experienced, that is your teacher, too. The monk felt an immense shift occur deep inside him. Are you saying that what I've been seeking so desperately is already here? I'm not saying anything at all, Chio replied with a gentle laugh. But what do you think right now, in this very moment? Are you suffering? Are you confused about the nature of reality? Are you failing to experience the truth? The monk looked slowly around him with fresh eyes. The soft morning light, the peaceful garden, the simple, grounding presence of the old woman, his own quiet breathing, the palpable sense of ease in his body. Objectively, nothing in the environment had changed, yet everything felt fundamentally different. It's so simple, he whispered in awe. Yes, Chio agreed. So simple that we often completely miss it while intently searching for something infinitely complicated. The monk ended up staying with Chio for 3 full days, not to learn any special techniques or hear profound, esoteric teachings, but solely to practice the simple art of presence. He assisted her with her mundane daily tasks, sat quietly with her in the mornings, and gradually discovered that the profound peace he had been seeking was fully available in every ordinary moment, provided he stopped searching for it somewhere else. When he finally continued his journey, his focus had completely changed. He was no longer desperately searching for an enlightened master. He had learned that enlightenment was not a thing to be found in a distant, exotic place or something that must be achieved through arduous special practices. Rather, it was the natural, inherent state of awareness when the mind ceases its struggle against its own existence. Years later, the monk would often tell his own students, "The greatest teacher I ever met was an old woman who taught me absolutely nothing and yet, in doing so, gave me everything I needed." This final tale seamlessly weaves together all the core teachings we have explored throughout this gentle, shared journey. The restless searching of the young monk mirrors our own persistent, anxious quest for something better, often placed somewhere else or projected into a future moment. Yet, the simple, effortless presence of Chio illuminates the profound truth that resonates through all Buddhist wisdom. What we ceaselessly seek is already present, perfectly available, and whole exactly as this moment unfolds. Together, we have traversed essential teachings on acceptance, the wisdom of letting go, the power of compassion, the anchor of mindfulness, and the liberation found in non-attachment. Along the way, we have continually discovered that our true nature is not a hidden secret but an obvious reality, not complex or difficult to grasp but profoundly simple, and never distant but immediately present in the miracle of every breath. Every narrative shared has ultimately pointed toward this same essential, unifying truth. Genuine peace is not an attainment we must labor to create, but rather a natural state we reveal simply by ceasing our desperate struggle against the reality of what is. Just like the monk resting on Chio's quiet porch, we encounter the deepest sense of rest precisely when we abandon the exhausting effort to desperately seek it out. We access the most profound and actionable teachings when we settle into simple, undivided presence with the reality of this very moment. The bird that gently lands at our feet, the life-giving breath flowing through our body, the awareness currently experiencing these very words. These are, in fact, our most potent and ever-present teachers. Take a long, slow, releasing breath and allow this fundamental understanding to settle deep into your physical being, warming you like comforting water. You realize now that the peace and wisdom you have diligently sought have been here all along, not as elusive future achievements, but as the natural, pristine state of awareness whenever it relaxes its tenacious grip on needing circumstances to be different. Let us settle into this fundamental recognition through one final, concluding story, a narrative designed to guide us gently back home to the sanctuary of our own innate, peaceful nature. Master Run, revered across the land, had dedicated 5 decades to guiding students through the intricacies of Buddhist practice and philosophy. His temple achieved widespread renown throughout the entire region, drawing pilgrims who would travel immense distances solely to attend his celebrated lectures and receive his personal spiritual guidance. He was universally respected for his profound, vast knowledge and his unmatched ability to articulate illuminating answers to even the most complex, nuanced questions concerning spiritual life. However, as Master Ren advanced in years, a notable transformation began to occur in his method of teaching. Instead of offering the long, elaborate philosophical explanations for which he was famous, he started responding to students' questions with increasingly simple and direct answers. Rather than assigning complicated, demanding practices, he now began gently suggesting that students simply sit quietly and focus solely on their breathing. This marked change left many of his devoted students feeling confused and somewhat unsettled. They had arrived seeking profound, cutting-edge insights and sophisticated, difficult practices, only to find their respected master offering them nothing more than the most fundamental instructions they had first learned as novices years ago. One quiet evening, a senior student, deeply troubled by this apparent regression, approached Master Ren. "Master, your recent teaching seems so vastly different from the profound knowledge you imparted to us previously. Are you feeling well? Have you, perhaps, forgotten the deeper, more complex aspects of the Dharma?" Master Ren responded with a gentle, knowing smile and invited his student to join him on the temple porch, settling down just as the first evening stars began to pierce the deepening twilight sky. "Tell me," the master began softly, "when you first arrived here to study with me 10 years ago, what exactly were you hoping to find?" "I was seeking enlightenment, the complete liberation from suffering, and a definitive understanding of ultimate reality," the student promptly replied. "And have you found these things?" The student paused, a noticeable hesitation in his voice. "I have certainly learned a great deal, and my practice has deepened significantly, but I still harbor the feeling that there is something crucial remaining, something more profound I need to understand or actively achieve." Master Ren gently pointed toward a brilliant star that had just become clearly visible in the lingering twilight. "Do you see that particular star?" "Yes, Master." "What exactly is it doing?" The student appeared confused. It's simply shining." "Is it trying to shine? Is it struggling or working hard to be bright? Is it seeking to become a better, more accomplished star?" "No, Master, it is just naturally shining." "And yet," Master Ren observed softly, "its radiant light has traveled unimaginable, vast distances across the cosmos merely to reach your eyes. Without any need for effort or anxious seeking, it perfectly illuminates the darkness for anyone who simply takes the time to look up." They sat together in a profound, peaceful silence, observing the growing multitude of stars appearing across the pristine canvas of the clear night sky. "When I was a much younger teacher," Master Ren continued thoughtfully, "I genuinely believed my sacred duty was to provide students with complicated, demanding practices and layers of profound, difficult-to-attain philosophical insights. I was convinced that enlightenment was an arduous state, something extremely challenging that required years of dedicated, special effort. But with the passage of time and age, I have discovered something entirely different." He made a sweeping gesture toward the breathtaking field of stars shimmering above them. "Behold this perfect, effortless teaching that presents itself every clear night. The stars do not struggle to radiate light. The sky does not make an effort to be spacious, nor does the night attempt to be peaceful. Yet, right here is the most flawless, eloquent demonstration of Buddha nature anyone could ever hope to witness." The student gazed heavenward at the stars, a sudden clarity sparking a new understanding. "Are you saying, Master, that our true nature is inherently like the stars, naturally luminous, requiring absolutely no painful effort?" "I am not saying anything at all," Master Ren replied, his voice soft with a gentle laugh. But what profound experience surfaces when you completely stop trying to intellectually figure everything out and instead simply rest in the vast, boundless awareness, much like the immense space that effortlessly holds all these stars. As they remained sitting side by side in the deep quiet of the night, the student gradually felt his incessantly busy mind effortlessly settling into a profound, natural stillness. The torrent of anxious questions and the habitual seeking that normally crowded his thoughts seemed to melt away, dissolving into the peaceful, expansive vastness of the evening sky. He realized he was not attempting to formally meditate or striving to achieve some designated state. He was simply present, anchored in the moment, much like the stars simply shining. "Master," he said quietly, a new reverence in his tone, "I believe I finally understand why your teaching approach has become so brilliantly simple." Why is that? Because what we are truly looking for is already so inherently simple that complicated, elaborate teachings only serve to obscure and cover up the truth. Master Ren nodded slowly, his expression affirming this realization. "After 50 years of dedicated teaching, I have learned that the most profound and liberating truth is, ironically, the most obvious one. Students arrive seeking convoluted wisdom, yet what they truly need is simply to remember how to relax and rest deeply within their own natural, uncontrived awareness." He stood up slowly, preparing to retreat inside for the night. The celestial stars have patiently offered this exact same teaching every single night for millions of years. They radiate light simply because that is their intrinsic nature, not because they are striving to achieve some external goal. When we finally discover that we, too, can simply be what we are, without fiercely struggling to become something better or different, we instantly access the boundless peace that has always been completely available to us. That night, the senior student experienced a quality of sleep more profound and restorative than any he had known in years. This deep rest was not the result of learning an intricate new concept, but the result of finally relaxing into something ancient, something natural, and something that had been always intimately present. He had truly discovered that the peace he had tirelessly sought was none other than the peace of awareness itself, not an achievement earned through struggle, but the essential, unshakable bedrock of his fundamental nature. This final, illuminating story gracefully guides us full circle back to our point of origin, but now equipped with the vital understanding that only comes from having traveled the path. We embarked on this journey together seeking transformation and enduring peace. And we have found both, not as lofty, distant goals looming on a horizon, but as the fundamental, supporting ground upon which we have been standing all along. Allow yourself to feel your body settling deeper into the quiet now, completely supported by the cushion or surface beneath you. Notice your breathing naturally slowing and deepening as your nervous system instinctively recognizes the absolute safety and sufficiency of this moment. Feel your mind quieting and easing its incessant activity, discovering that it no longer needs to frantically search for something better located somewhere else. Tonight, you have received the timeless teachings that have steadily guided countless beings toward liberation and freedom for over 2 millennia. This ancient wisdom has traversed immense distances of time and space, reaching you like the light of a long-dead star finally meeting your eyes. These teachings have planted potent seeds deep within the fertile ground of your awareness, seeds that will continue to sprout and grow in their own perfect, natural timing. Know that there is absolutely nothing more you need to actively do tonight, nothing to urgently achieve, and nothing left to intellectually figure out. The path you have traveled alongside these profound teachings continues onward, not fueled by striving effort, but by the simple, peaceful remembering of the perfect being you have always fundamentally been. Like water settling into its natural level, like the celestial stars naturally radiating their light, your innate peace will emerge, not through any kind of forcing, but purely through gentle allowing. Our gentle, shared journey through these timeless, essential teachings now gracefully draws to its conclusion. Together, we have traversed stories illuminating acceptance and the freedom of letting go, the warmth of compassion and the anchor of mindfulness, true wisdom and ultimate liberation. Above all, we have collectively discovered that the peace we desire is never somewhere distant, but resides right here in the luminous reality of this very moment. Not an objective to be achieved, but a foundational truth waiting only to be recognized. The spirit of the ancient masters who first illuminated and shared these profound truths rests within you now, held within the quiet, expansive space of awareness. You carry within your being the exact same radiant Buddha nature that awakened in them centuries ago. As you rest and sleep tonight, these teachings will continue their silent, quiet work, settling deeply into the hidden layers of your being like nourishment sinking into fertile soil. There is truly nothing left for you to accomplish tonight. Allow your body to sink completely and totally into rest, secure in the knowledge that genuine wisdom operates most effectively in profound stillness. Let your breathing continue to slow and deepen naturally as your mind peacefully releases the scattered concerns and demands of the day. Remember that the deep peace you have glimpsed and touched through these stories is perpetual, always available, always patiently waiting for your gentle return. Thank you sincerely for walking this contemplative path with the sleepy monk. May you rest profoundly and deeply in the inviolable sanctuary of your own peaceful nature. May you awaken tomorrow morning with a gentle, clear remembering of the profound simplicity that resides effortlessly at your very center. As the teaching reminds us, genuine peace comes solely from within. Do not waste energy seeking it outside yourself. Tonight, you have successfully turned inward and confirmed that this ancient, liberating truth still holds absolute power. The peace you have briefly touched is not conditional. It is not dependent upon achieving perfect external circumstances or the absence of all life problems. It is purely and simply the natural, resting state of awareness when it completely stops fighting against the reality of what is. The great Zen masters understood perfectly that enlightenment is not a distant reward requiring decades of arduous, specialized effort. Rather, it is the simple, instantaneous recognition of what has been completely present since the beginning of time. Like the luminous moon reflected perfectly in utterly still water, your inherent Buddha nature has been quietly radiating all along, waiting only for the turbulent waves of your mental activity to settle and subside. In this newfound stillness, you remember what the ancient ones lovingly termed your original face. That pristine, pure awareness that existed long before you ever learned to believe you were separate or fragmented from the boundless whole. The middle way, that balanced path the Buddha traversed between the extremes of lavish luxury and severe hardship, is alive and manifest in your breath right now. It is found in neither forcing experience nor aggressively resisting it, but simply in gentle allowing. The limitless compassion that naturally flows from deeply understanding our shared human suffering gently expands and opens within your heart as you rest. The profound wisdom of impermanence, which teaches us the liberation of holding all things lightly, settles deeply into the core of your being. Recognize this vital truth. You are not merely learning about these transformative teachings. In this moment of rest, you are quietly becoming them. Rest now completely in the great, encompassing silence that naturally holds all sounds, the vast, accommodating space that lovingly embraces all experience. The lineage of ancestors smiles upon you as another soul gently remembers the effortless way home. It has been a truly wonderful, meaningful journey shared with you tonight. Sleep well, and thank you deeply for joining us here.